local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council
Afternoon and a warm welcome to each and every one of you, and thank you indeed for being here. Can I wish you all a happy new year and hopefully have a great year in this great city that we live in. Can I also, as we're opening the meeting, to acknowledge our Aboriginal elders and ask Auntie Sharon Hobble, if you'd like to come forward.
Yapalingana. Hello and welcome. I would like to acknowledge with respect our ancestral people, the original custodians who walked, hunted, held ceremonies and cared for this land for thousands of years. I acknowledge the spirits of these ancestors and our elders past and present, for they are the keepers of our knowledge, our culture, our traditions and most important, storytellers. I also acknowledge my people, the Aboriginal community of today, who can trace their lineage along with their culture and spiritual heritage to the ancient peoples of this island, Tasmania and the Furneaux Islands. Despite a tragic history, our heritage, culture, land, dance, music and our arts still live on today. We grow strong as a community and are moving into the future, knowing the importance of maintaining our cultural heritage for the benefit of our children and the generations that come after us. It is up to us as a community to focus on maintaining family practices and our heritage for today's generation and our future generations. In closing, I again, on behalf of the Aboriginal elders and the Aboriginal community of Tasmania, welcome you all here and wish everyone a successful meeting. Williga. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Auntie Sharon, for that welcome to country. And in the spirit of recognition, we, the citizens of this great city, Launceston, recognise that Launceston is situated on country of which the Tasmanian Aboriginal people have been owners for over 35,000 years, on which they have performed age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation and renewal. We acknowledge the Aboriginal community of today, their living culture and unique role in the life of this region, and offer our deep appreciation of their ongoing contribution to our community. I also at this time acknowledge that it's on a sad basis that one of our staff passed away on Monday, Steve Benson. He was a member of the regulations team in the Development Services Directorate and he joined the City of Launceston in January 2018. Council extends its condolences to his family and his friends and his workmates. We can now have a minute of silence for his family and friends and for Steve. Thank you very much. Please be seated. So we have no apologies today. Declaration of interest. Any declaration of interest? Alderman Stodnicek?
Item 8.1.
8.1, thank you. Confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting held on the 20th of December. Someone happy to move those? Councillor Dawkins. Seconded by Councillor Soward. Just got to get used to this Alderman Councillor thing. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is carried. Thank you. No deputations I have on this one. No petitions. I understand. Community reports. We have Miss Ella Dixon, Chief Executive Officer, and Roger Teiching. I'm not sure who's doing the speaking, both or... Welcome. It's your opportunity to tell us a bit about the Migrant Resource Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I usually have problems with microphones.
You're right, it's fine.
Firstly, good afternoon. This is Roger Teiching, our chairperson. To the Deputy Mayor, thank you for the invitation to come and talk to you today. Most of you are aware of the work of the Migrant Resource Centre, so we're very happy to be here to just expand on that a little bit. For some of you who don't know, the Migrant Resource Centre, Northern Tasmania, and I'll call us MRC North from here on in, we were established in 1982 to provide services for new arrivals in Australia. And we started off as a one-person operation managed by a management committee, and we've grown to a really complex organisation managing a $2.5 million operating budget. We have 25 staff, 80 volunteers, and we're managing around 20 government contracts at any one time. So we've grown from a very small operation into a really complex not-for-profit organisation working in a commercial environment. Some of you will be aware of the more visible programs that we run. Some of you have been great supporters of the community kitchen, for example. And that's when our community groups take over the lunch service at Invest Tavern for about 5 months of the winter months, of the colder months, I should say, and provide food and raise awareness about multiculturalism in Tasmania. Harmony Day, thank you to Council sponsorship. We're able to host something slightly different this year within Civic Square. Some of the things that we'll be doing this year is a flag parade, a multicultural karaoke, and also the usual food and dance and traditional performances. The other visible programs that we have, the Drive for Life programs, the driver mentoring programs, you will see our cars. We are hoping to provide opportunities for people to turn their L1s into provisional licenses, which is a really great opportunity, because the 3 barriers to any new arrival is English, education and employment. So everything that we do, while some of it is not visible, everything that we do is around increasing people's individual capacity and also group capacity to ensure that they become independent over time. There have been lots of changes in our sector. We are very sensitive to things like the global movement around migration and also the policies that fall out of those sentiments around the world and also nationally. One of the things that happened in 2017 is that we suffered loss of funding because of program rationalisation and also the government's preference to deal with fewer contracts, which meant that the work for Tasmania, Victoria and South Australia went to a Melbourne-based large organisation. And that organisation then subcontracted to MRC Tasmania South, and they've now renamed themselves MRC Tasmania. So there's a little bit of confusion in the community about 2 MRCs, but there are lots of MRCs around Australia because we are a product of the 1970s. The other significant change that's happened is the waves of migrants and refugees. Back after World War II, it was the European migrants, and then now MRC North is probably more known for our hub for refugees. We have assisted over 3,500 people since arriving under the humanitarian program. There are people from Sudan, Afghanistan, Burma, Nepal, just to name a few. And for those of you who have come to our Harmony Day events and other celebrations like our Jobs and Disability, our Employment Pathways programs, you will know the importance of having a locally based organisation running programs like this, because we have a passion for regional settlement, we understand the local community, and we also have closer connections with stakeholders. And I think that counts for a lot. And we hope that the council, and we know that the mayor and the deputy mayor do this quite actively as well, in that they advocate for continued funding of locally based organisations like ours. We remain strong and we remain relevant, despite the little knockback that we had. Luckily for us, we had future-proofed our organisation, and we were ready to activate our plans to make sure that we stayed strong. One of the things that we're doing soon is we're going to launch a different trading name called Tasmanian Multicultural Services to mark a new era for us, and also to run programs under a different name that will hopefully distinguish us and alleviate that confusion of having 2 MRCs in Launceston. We'll continue also to work with the Council, the Tasmanian Government, NTDC, and also RDA Tasmania to advocate for regional resettlement and continue to contribute to population growth and diversity in Launceston. So I'll just pass on now to our Chair just to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, on behalf of the board of MRC North, I'd like to thank City of Launceston for support of migrants over the years and also maintaining the refugee welcome zone. We're very well set up in the north here to keep supporting migrants as they come to Tasmania, help them settle and help them to contribute to our wonderful community here. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, and appreciate the work you do in our community for people who obviously need help when they come out here and settle down. And I know the work you do is fantastic. You go into the AGM this year, I hear many good stories and see the great work. So congratulations for the work you're doing.
Thank you for your time.
Now, it's public question time. There's no public questions on notice, so public questions without notice.
Ron Baines, Kings Meadows. There's been some discussion around parking in Launceston, and I'd like to ask the council, would they consider extending the allotted 1 hour spaces in the CBD up to 90 minutes? Because for a lot of people, 1 hour just isn't sufficient time to be able to do what they need to do in the city. And this would be more acceptable, even if people had to pay for that time. That would be, I would imagine, pretty fine. However, if some free parking, which has been discussed by council, would be available, that would, of course, would be great. However, the main question is, at this stage, would the council be open to extending that 1 hour time period? And while I speak about that, would the council consider placing a notice on parking meters to inform users that feeding the meters is illegal? Now, I was told this by one of your own meter readers when I attempted to help somebody whose meter had run out. And I offered to put some money in the meter, and your meter reader told me it was illegal, I couldn't do it. And we had a bit of a debate on the subject for a couple of minutes.
Yep, thank you. It's the parking is under review at the moment. We are doing a review of all our parking throughout the city, so I'm sure that's one of the issues as General Manager that we can take on board to have a look at that. So that'll become part of our parking review, which we trust will be done in the next 2 to 3 months at the longest, 2 months hopefully, somewhere in that time. And I'm sure with the feeding of meters is allowed up to the time limit on the meter. So if the meter says an hour, you're allowed to go to the hour. If you do half an hour, you can always come back and do another half hour. But what you can't do is go over the hour, and that's where it becomes illegal, just so you're aware of that. And I'm sure if you want to add anything to that, Bruce?
Yes, council also provides for shoppers who want to stay in the city longer.
Yep.
Just outside the CBD, there's longer time periods, 2 to 3 hours. And
Well,
also,
yes, I'm aware there's spaces that last longer, but not everybody could walk that distance, can they?
yeah, for those who can't walk, we also provide conveniently provided multi-deck car parks where shoppers can park all day if they wish.
All right, thank you.
Free from 3:30 to 5:30. Or if they want to park out, they can catch the Tiger bus at certain times. So there are other options as well.
All right, thank you. The last question is, with the current upgrade of the first basin area, which I've recently been up to a couple of times, is the council considering planting some more trees up there for additional shade, and considering that skin cancer is a big public debate these days? So will there be any more trees planted, or is it just going to remain pretty bare like it is now?
Would you want to take it on notice, or you want to answer that? You can answer that. Thank you, Shane.
We've been growing trees in our nursery the last few years to place into the gorge. We expect probably April, May this year we'll place them in the first basin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? No more? Oh, there is. Yep.
I'd just like to understand how the council uses the qualitative data that you collect from community surveys. I've completed a few myself, but I'm not really sure how that impacts policies and decisions.
Well, General Manager, wish to give the detail?
Thanks, Mayor. I mean, it's complex, and depending upon which sort of, I guess, process you're talking about. So if it's a project or a strategic plan, then certainly that directly informs the development of that plan, and certainly the council considers puts draft plans out or draft policies out or draft documents out for consultation, receives the feedback, and then draws or makes its views on whether any changes are required in respect of that feedback that it receives. So.
May I clarify the question?
Yeah.
For example, a survey asked more about our opinion of Launceston. One of the questions was quite difficult to answer. It asked, do you find Launceston beautiful or ugly? They're quite very end of the spectrum options with no in between. And so that kind of data that isn't specific to a particular...
Yeah, to planning or whatever.
Strategy.
Well, we would take that on board. We get information of all the community consultation, and the council members would take that on board when we're making our decisions on policy and during the year. So if there's anything specific that you think we should know, always be prepared, be willing to give us an email to the councillors, and then we can add it in as well. Thank you. Any other questions?
So that the council doesn't sort of get a development at any cost reputation, on the hark back to the 1950s and 60s, what value and how much value does council place on heritage and or natural values in its planning deliberations? That's one question.
The General Manager.
Thanks, Mayor. We'll certainly place a great deal of value on it to the extent that we have a natural assets code and a scenic protection code within the planning scheme and a specific heritage code, which provides a framework that all planning decisions need to be consistent with when we're determining them. So the fact that it's in the planning scheme requires that it actually be addressed in each application.
May I ask a sub-question on that?
Yeah, certainly.
When you look at heritage, you mainly seem to take notice of the Tasmanian Heritage Council's reports and so on, which are not comprehensive, and that will also depend on whether somebody has entered their 150, 200-year-old property on that register. So it's not all-inclusive, that's what I'll say about that one. So only considering that, and whatever list you might have in council, doesn't necessarily make it a comprehensive heritage sort of value, so I would say.
Is that a statement more, I think, isn't it?
Would you agree or not?
Well, I think we consider, the Heritage Council, there's no doubt about that. We've got a heritage people in our own council to give us advice as well, so we try to look at all the heritage aspects.
Second question. What is the value or point of planning a planning scheme, A, if anyone can simply apply to have changing in zone, and there have been, some, and B, what value does council place on the reasons and values behind the original zonings? So if it's zoned X, what were the reasons behind it being zoned X? And why should X be changed?
Thank you. General Manager.
The need for a planning scheme. Sorry, I forgot the own microphone. So, obviously, we need to determine the future direction of council with respect to the land use planning, and that's determined by our strategic documents. So the long-term plans that we have. So we've got a regional land use strategy, which is guiding development for land use planning throughout the entire northern part of Tasmania now. And things change over time with respect to different, demands for sites or needs within the community, and so there is a requirement from time to time that you are able to review that strategy that you have from a land use planning perspective and alter that by a planning scheme amendment. Now, there's controls around a planning scheme amendment to make sure that they aren't done without due regard to all of the matters, and so a process in order to change a planning scheme involves a public consultation process. It involves the council making its own mind up that it is consistent with the future direction that it sees for the municipal area, and it then passes a recommendation onto the state government, so the Tasmanian Planning Commission, who then make the ultimate decision as to whether all the boxes have been ticked, if you like, in respect of the need or otherwise for the planning scheme amendment. Certainly the existing character of the area that's been provided by the zoning that exists is taken into account to make sure that it is consistent with what the proposed amendment is. But the intention is that you have a public process that's governed not only by the council but by the state government to ensure that you are getting the best and robust planning decisions made.
May I just clarify on that? I actually asked you, what value does council place on those reasons that were already there for the original zonings? How much consideration do you give to those? What processes do you go through to then negate those and say, no, that's no longer important? The original reasons for that, are no longer important. Yes. And I guess they would particularly apply to heritage and natural values, because surely those things don't change.
Yeah, look, and it's considered on balance. Obviously, there are reasons and opportunities that are sought to change the planning scheme for various reasons. That it might be that there's a demand for additional residential land, or there is for commercial land, or whatever the scenario is. But in making that determination, the council does need to be and does place value on the existing character, and that it does not unreasonably detriment or cause, I guess, issues with respect to changes in that character, unless that's what the regional land use strategy or the strategy of the council is to pursue. Which again is why you have that public process that everyone is able to be a part of, engage in, and have their voice heard in respect to the decisions.
Thank you. Any other questions?
My name is Robin Smith. I work at a cafe in the Brisbane Street Mall called Coffee Republic. I'm referring to the food van trial consultation, and there is concern, having been around many businesses in the mall. The General Manager made a comment in the Examiner 9th of January saying that food businesses in the CBD had, quote, been engaged. I wonder what engagement that was. Having got a petition that I've taken around and collected 36 signatures from cafes, food businesses in the CBD, none of them seem to be involved in a consultation process or engagement. And secondly, what would the such engagement has it been with the councillors, having and considering that they have looked at this issue that I'm aware of over the last 20 years and rejected it pretty much in each and every case. What consultation or input have you had engaging the councillors on this matter, please?
Yeah, thank you. We'll take that on notice and get a written response to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Second question is, I have asked the council during the City Heart construction work that it would be a good time to remove, I considered, an artwork that's inappropriate for the mall. There's a marble and bronze artwork, and it was funded and designed by a person who has been convicted of child sex offences, is currently serving a prison sentence. That artwork remains. I suggested to council that during the build it would be opportune to remove it. Council chose not to do that. I'm wondering why, considering so many artworks with a unfortunate history, and certainly it would be insensitive to leave it there if that was the case, considering the victims may still live in Launceston. Why does council insist on leaving that artwork in situ, please?
Yeah, thank you for that. We'll take that on notice as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No, thank you. So under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included in the agenda under item 8, the Planning Authority. So 8.1 is the first one. Now we have a number of speakers. General Manager, if you could read out the rules, please.
Thank you, Mayor. So only residents, ratepayers or people on the electoral roll of the City of Launceston may address an item on the agenda. Before commencing, please state your name and address or property owned in Launceston. You may speak for up to 2 minutes. There's no extension of time permitted. You may speak for or against the recommendation, not ask questions of aldermen or officers, or attempt to enter into debate with aldermen or officers. Statements can only be made either directly relating to supporting the recommendation or arguing against it. Comments and statements are not to be defamatory, offensive or abusive, or be designed to embarrass any persons, including aldermen or officers. Statements are not to be repetitive of statements or points already made. Several people repeating a common position should nominate a single speaker on their behalf. The Mayor may ask a member of the gallery to cease speaking if the above procedures are not followed. Following hearing the comments of the gallery, Alderman will then consider the item.
Better change that to councillors in future. Sure. Thank you. General Manager. So Jane Grubb.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for letting me speak. My name is Jane Grubb, and we live at 366 St Leonard's Road, which is an internal block that currently shares the access road to 368. I know a lot of the focus of the objections has been on the southern and the main entrance for the school. Our issue is that our entrance is a single lane blind spot drive. The staff that we're aware of are going to be using that drive. If you go to turn into that road and someone is coming up, there is nowhere to go but to back into oncoming traffic. simple enough way of fixing it would be to just widen the road so that it's got 2 lanes. We use it, my grandchildren ride their bikes up there. It's always been an issue. We've had a couple of close calls. We've gone to turn in, cars been coming up. You literally have to back with cars coming forward. So it's a simple enough matter to fix, but if it's not fixed, it's going to be extremely dangerous. They said there's going to be 12 staff members coming and going, and we are coming and going all the time. It's just a short area that needs to be widened, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Maureen Ridgely.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Councillors. My name is Maureen Ridgely and I live at 373 St Leonard's Road. My concern is about the entry and exit out of the proposed car park onto a very busy state road. I have been given conflicting information about the exact address of the said car park. This road has log trucks, timber trucks, large amounts of four-wheel drives and school buses that use it daily. Safety concern for entering and exiting my own driveway. About 90% of the children are from out of this area. That's bringing in at least an extra 50 cars into an already congested place. And do we need another school here? When the St Leonard State School is only 300 metres up the road, which is highly congested. No standing zone outside my house, which is going to inconvenience me immensely. It will also inconvenience some of my elderly neighbours who rely on carers, cleaners and visitors daily. I have lived there, have lived in that area for 50 years and I'm now worried about the loss of amenity if the school goes ahead. And thank you to the 6 councillors who returned my phone calls regarding this matter.
Thank you. Teresa Hatton.
I'm Teresa Hatton. I live at 206 St Leonard's Road. Mayor and councillors, my points refer against the Steiner School. There seems to be discretionaries in the submission as relation to the agenda have different answers and the response that was provided also have different answers. The location of the driveway in the agenda says 376 to 378. The submissions has got at 378A. Does this mean that the site distance provided in the submission are actually done from the wrong block? The widening of the driveway, we were told in the mediation that the driveway at 378 was going to be widened to 6 metres. In the response, it says 368 driveway is going to be widened. Is this information correct? In response to the crashes on the road, as it stands now, these crashes are 4 or 5. Does this then increase when the traffic hits 60 coming out of the school? Do the traffic increases? School up the road, St Leonard's School, has a high traffic incidents which are also not reported. The agenda talks about a future 15 car spaces. Do they need a planning permit for this or have I missed this on the plans? The car parking, when taking into account the existing house parked at 382, the car parked along the road on the western side of the street, it's going to be difficult to see a car coming out of the dip, out of the car park entry. The line of sight will be different somewhat to someone doing 60 kilometres an hour. It's going to be difficult. The entry and the exit of the car park is 4 metres wide, which is not wide enough. How are you going to get people in and out of a 4 metre domestic wide driveway? We were told that the school was staying in Station Road. The response now states that they are moving this to the proposed site. Does this mean that there is an increased numbers to the students in the report? There are also conflicting information in their submission. The advice provided to us about the objectives and the report prepared in the agendas, this all is conflicting information. As was said, these students are outside of area.
Thank you. Your time is up. Thank you. Ben Marcus.
Good day everyone, my name is Ben Marcus from 101 Abbott Street, East Launceston. I'd like to speak in favour of the proposal. I'm a board member and lovely parent of Steiner School. I'd just like to address quickly any access and road safety concerns in relation to some other speakers, particularly on access. I had the joy of spending 5 years commuting the organised chaos of Scotch and Launceston Prep School, and honestly, I'm quite pleased to say this application kind of lifts the bar on Launceston school safety. I'd like to just emphasise that the drop-off is internal to the site, parking is internal to the site, and the school entrance is also internal to the site. So we're looking forward to having no scenes of kind of peak hour on Ho Chi Minh City like elsewhere. The other point on road safety is, as you may be aware, that there's a 5-tier state road hierarchy in Tasmania. So category 1 being the busiest, your Bass Highways, your Bell Bay roads kind of thing. Right down to your quietest roads, like which was category 5, which is like the road out to Boobialla, the ghost town, and also St Leonard's Road. Now, the main use of St Leonard's Road, which is the Cat 5, is to access private property. It does permit the lowest level of frequency of heavy vehicle movements on state road. So in fact, according to Australia's Road Safety and Design Body, Austroads, the frequency of heavy vehicle movements on St Leonard's Road is so low it said recommended no design interventions required. Final point is, and it's in the application in front of you, the traffic engineers reckon this proposal keeps St Leonard's Road safe and efficient and it ticks all the performance criteria. Look, that's good. To be honest, if there's one group that honestly wants this proposal to be safe more so than the traffic engineers, it's probably going to be the school board and the parents who are going to send their kids there. Thank you.
Thank you. Anne Ball.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Councillors, and thank you for this opportunity. So my name's Annie Ball and I'm from Elfin Road. I'm the college chair of the Steiner School, so I'm speaking in support of it. So a college chair is, I guide the pedagogical and cultural aspects of the school in a collegiate of leadership. So our model is one that strives at all times to build strength into our consultation and our collaboration and inclusivity. So whilst we strive for that within the school, we would also strive to have this ripple into the community, and we would be very, very keen to work with our neighbours, and certainly we don't want any of their needs or access to their property to be compromised at any time. We've spoken to a lot of our neighbours as a part of that process, and we'd like that to be ongoing. So, of course, I'm very passionate about Steiner education, as an educational impulse, so I could speak a long time about that. But I guess, for me, the thing that makes me feel so privileged to be part of this school impulse is just the difference I've seen it make to children's lives. And they're the children who often don't have the same intelligences that education focuses on now. So it's lovely to watch children who are hands-on, whose abilities are more in nature, thrive. And whilst we don't have graduates from a Steiner school yet in Launceston, when I meet a graduate from a Steiner school, I'm always very impressed at how tall they stand in their thinking and how tall they stand in their humanity, with a really strong sense of who they are, what their responsibility to the world is, and their ability to respond to the contemporary issues of today.
Thank you.
Oh.
Stephen Norris.
Good afternoon. Stephen Norris is my name. I live in 69 Elfin Road. I'm a recently appointed member of the school council of the Tamil Valley Steiner School. Previously, I've been an independent school principal for 15 years in the city and an educator for over 35 years. I've recently viewed the site in question and known something of the philosophy of Steiner schools and the aims of the school council. I could not see a better sort of location for this school to be set up. I visited the current already overstretched resources and facilities and see the opportunity to move the school to this site as a great advantage for the school in its future. Thank you.
Thank you. Jared Murray.
My name is Jared Murray. I'm from Upton Street in Launceston. I'm a parent of the school
and I have 2 kids enrolled, and I am also on their school board. I was educated for the majority of my schooling at several Steiner schools on the mainland, and as a parent, I want the same opportunity for my own children. This is why I put large amounts of time into the school. I benefited a great deal from my Steiner education that I received, and it constantly plays a role in my adult life. I also found that the Steiner school suited me far better as a child than the public education system, and I believe that it's vitally important that we have alternative education options available to the children of Launceston and St Leonard's in particular. Our proposal complies with the planning scheme, and in particular with the Parking and Transport Code. There is a demand for the Steiner School in St Leonard's, as shown by enrolments from several families in the local area and the support that we've had from many of the locals that we've engaged with over time. The school is already located in St Leonard's on Station Road, so the impact of traffic will largely be a change to the existing traffic and not all new traffic. It'll actually improve the situation around the St Leonard's Primary School as we move further away. The impact on the streetscape will also be very minimal, as our block is set well back from the street and the car park is also set back. Access is via what was originally intended to be a driveway. Tamar Valley Steiner School has been operating at French Street in the city, where our kinder prep is located, for 3 years, and in St Leonard's for 2 years without any complaints from our neighbours. We've had quite positive interactions with many of them. We've kept the neighbours of this new site informed throughout the process, and we've had great feedback and support from many of them. The proposal before you represents a compliant and appropriate use of the land and its own low-density residential, and I hope that you can agree with the recommendations and approve this.
Thank you. Darren Woodward.
I'm speaking on behalf of Darren Woodward. To the Launceston City Council and people that don't know what it's like to have lived on St Leonard's Road. St Leonard's Road is a main heavy traffic route and the state road, which itself speaks volumes. With more and more developments in vineyards at Blessington, Ettington Road and Everton Road, the ski fields, bushwalking, mountain biking tracks going into Ben Lomond. The 300 block subdivision between White Hills and Evandale, St Leonard's Road is only going to increase in heavy traffic and get more and more dangerous. Log trucks, gravel trucks, low loaders with heavy machinery, firewood carters, tour buses, and the list goes on. In the winter months, it's even worse with the constant fog from the river that doesn't lift until the late afternoon, and there is again when you wake up the next morning. As a long-term resident and a professional heavy combination truck driver, I can't for the life of me understand why any councillor or council would support a fourth school so close to the other on such a busy, dangerous road with such heavy traffic. And I have to live there for you to understand it. The proposed site is on a blind corner and has blind to the dip and the rise at the approach of both ends. A yes vote to this development is signing an innocent people's death certificate, and I hope that a yes voters are prepared to stand accountable to this. Darren Woodward, St Leonard's Road.
Thank you. John Ayres.
Thank you, Mayor. John Ayres, Principal Planner with GHD, consultant to the Steiner Group. The application demonstrates compliance with the zone standards and the code requirements of the scheme. In particular, it complies with the use standards, which relates to the hours of operation, mechanical plant and equipment, light, spill and illumination, external goods storage, and commercial vehicle parking, which is all contained on site. It complies with the development standards in terms of location of car parking, and in particular the development of the prerequisites for the development of discretionary uses. It's considered compatible with the surrounding area, given the separation of parking from its frontage, the pedestrian pathways which are provided. Clearly, the setback of buildings is significant in terms of the streetscape, because the streetscape is, in our view, unaffected, given the site topography in particular, which falls from St Leonard's Road. The height and bulk of buildings and structures are consistent with those in the surrounding area, and there is no overshadowing of the adjoining buildings or lots. Importantly, buildings that are on the site and as part of the development when viewed from adjacent lots, do not change noticeably, and so the impact in terms of their position, the scale and orientation is insignificant in terms of the neighbours. The property access at 380 St Leonard's Road is likewise unaffected. In terms of the road, asset and car parking codes, the traffic impact assessment which was submitted with the application demonstrates consistency with that code. Compliance with performance criteria relate to development standards in terms of site distance, which are well in excess of that which is required in both directions, and the access is safe and appropriate.
Your time is up as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Dunn.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. My name is David Dunn and I'm here to speak on behalf of my mother who resides at 355 St Leonard's Road. Mum's concerns are not so much with the school being developed at the suggested location, but more so the safety issues to residents, parents, users of the road and the children attending the school. Mum believes that should the development be approved, there are a number of safety issues that must be addressed by council prior to the school opening and having any student attend there. As previously noted, a section of the footpath between St Leonard's Primary School and the Steiner School is severely obstructed by a hedge. This makes it a safety issue for anyone walking on the western side of St Leonard's Road. At 360 St Leonard's Road, the footpath ends, so anyone walking towards the proposed school site are then required to either cross the road or walk in the parking lane. The footpath needs to be continued along this section to ensure safe passage for the pupils of the school, as well as the other residents who live further along St Leonard's Road on that side. As suggested in the planning application, a section of road being no stopping between certain hours will help alleviate some of the traffic issues for residents, but will also cause inconvenience for them. With the vehicles being parked outside residents, however, on the eastern side of the road, residents will have to risk their own safety and others' safety when attempting to exit their properties. They will need to be across the southbound lane before they can see if they have clear passage from traffic heading north. St Leonard's Road is the main thoroughfare to Van Lomond, White Hills, Blessington and beyond, and heavy-duty vehicles including log trucks use this road multiple times daily, and with the increasing number of vineyards and real estate being developed, especially at White Hills, traffic flow is increasing. And if vehicles are currently parked on both sides of St Leonard's Road and two trucks are coming in opposite directions, there is very little spare space for them to pass. Add to this a school entrance and this creates another risk factor to be considered. With the new subdivisions in the area, traffic flow is set to increase in the coming years, and whilst planning can't be based on what the future may or may not be, it should take into account the current activity in the area. Whilst Mum appreciates other people live next door or near to schools, the residents all at St Leonard's built or purchased their properties with the school further along the road and didn't expect to end up with one in their front yard.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
That's all the speakers I have here. Anybody else that wanted to speak? Oh, thank you. So we have 8.1, item 8.1. Anybody happy to move a motion? Moved. Alderman Councillor Dawkins. Is there a seconder? Councillor Spencer. Do you wish to speak to it? A question from Councillor Finlay.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a couple of questions to follow up from those comments from speakers just then. Clarification on the width of the driveway and the location of the driveway, and clarification for the point made from the report on page 8 in regards to the additional car parks and whether they do form part of this approval or not, or required for future approval.
Thank you. Director Hurst.
Thank you for the question. As per the plans, the driveway will be 6.2 metres wide, and we're considering the 18 car parks as part of the application. Thanks.
That's not an additional 18?
No, no.
Thank you. Question? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Just in terms of clarity, because there has been some concern around the inconsistencies between the report and the responses provided, could we just have clarity with regard to the existing site entry at 368 versus the proposed new entrance 376 to 378, their intended use, and further to the comment just made, clarification of design and size?
Director Hurst or Ian?
Thank you. 368 will be remaining the same, with from my understanding, no changes. The major change will happen at 378, where the majority of traffic will come through. Teachers will be able to utilise the existing access at 368.
Thank you. Also, again, in terms of clarification, the proposal will result in the total relocation of the existing Steiner School to the new location. Is that effective immediately with French Street and the Soldiers Memorial Hall ceasing operation, or is it a staged process? If so, how does that work? Because again, there's inconsistencies in the correspondence provided.
Director Hurst or Ian?
Thank you, Mayor. Our understanding is that it will move over a number of years. However, the decision that is before Council to make today is with regard to what the ultimate use will be at this site.
Thank you, Mayor. Ultimate use, is that based on a maximum of 102 students and 12 staff?
That is what has been requested in the development application and is what is in the recommendation for today's decision.
Thank you. This question, Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. My only concern is 368 is a shared driveway. Can that be made 6 metres? And also the speed limit needs to be dropped to 40, the same as outside the St Leonard School. That's a state issue, but it probably needs to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hurst.
Thanks, Mayor. That's a technical question that we would need to research the answer to. We're not in a position to be able to answer that without notice.
So you would do some research now, will you?
You
can look at it while we have other questions and speak.
Would like us to.
Thank you. Oh, General Manager? No? Okay. Councillor Finlay, do you have a question?
Further to Councillor Gibson, Deputy Mayor Gibson's question in regards to the report on page 4, comments that there will be 102 students, 12 full-time equivalent staff members, and that will encompass kinder prep, primary and secondary. So it is intended that the application before us today is for the conclusion of the staged process of bringing both existing schools to this one site, and that the maximum number of students on site up to grade 10 in the future is to be 102 students.
Director Hurst.
Thank you, Mayor. That's correct. Under this development application, that is the case, and if the school wished to expand beyond those numbers, a subsequent application would be required.
Councillor Dawkins, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor, I do. I move this motion to get the debate happening on this. I can see that there's a lot of confusion and concern around parking and the mere fact that a school is being proposed for this site. I mean, from my personal opinion, good community development definitely involves alternative schools. I can see why any parent of a student in Australia would want an alternative to the command and control cookie-cutter version of education that most of us move through. It doesn't mean that it's for everybody, but I certainly think that there should be an alternative. So merely suggesting that those students attend another school in this instance isn't possible because it's in fact the only one of its kind in the Launceston LGA. I've moved the motion, as I said, to get debate happening because I think it's an important debate to have. We need to consider the parking and traffic issues that people in the area have put forward, and as the proponents have suggested, that they have attempted to engage with everybody in the area. I can only take that at face value and hope that that is, in fact, the case, and that they continue to engage with people in their area, because if they don't, this is one of those planning matters that could in fact end up with a circumstance where nobody around them is happy, and that is never ever a good outcome for planning. So I'm very interested to hear other debate on this matter. There has been some confusion around the addresses, widths of driveways, how many cars could pass on that road, and I don't know that we've completely cleared it up now, but I hope during this debate we will be able to understand better how this proposal could work for the community.
Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Spencer? No? Any other speakers? Question, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. With regard to the issues that have been raised, not just by speakers today, but also in correspondence with myself and other councillors visiting the site, with regard to the footpath on the western side, obviously that would be subsequent to the DA that is before us today. What would be the process and what would be the timeline, and who would need to foot the bill, and how would we initiate, if this development application is successful today, seeing that footpath put into council work schedule, noting that in terms of safety and amenity would be significantly, would be required, and go some way to significantly ease the concerns of some of the representatives.
Thank you. Director Hurst?
Repeat.
Thank you.
Sorry, I know there's lots of questions happening. Obviously, there is no footpath on the western side. How would we go about that, and how would we look to have that implemented at a time that is consistent with the development application if it was approved today?
I'm sorry, is that the parking restrictions?
No, the footpath.
That's my next question, but the footpath on the western side.
General Manager.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So a couple of points that have been raised are ones that the council either can direct outside of the planning process or need to lobby on outside of the planning process. So the footpath is entirely within the remit of council to be able to consider, and then to reprioritise, its public works program to be able to do that, and that's something we can consider outside of the planning decision today, but certainly that's an option that the council has available to it. In respect of the point that was made earlier around the change to a 40km/h speed limit, that's beyond our purview to be able to make that change. The state government is the road authority, and they would need to make that change, but again, the council has the ability to be able to lobby and seek that change outside of the planning process if that's something that it wishes to do. So,
thank you, General Manager. And Director Hurst is answering a previous question.
Thank
go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. In response to the question about the driveway at 368 St Leonard's Road, Mr Ayres in his response from GHD in his response to the representations has indicated that the driveway could be widened to a minimum of 6 metres to allow passing for the first 30 metres from the edge of the roadway, which would mitigate the issue that was raised in that particular representation. At this stage, the recommendation has not required that, but as I said, the consultant response has indicated that that could be done.
Deputy Mayor, do you have a question? Follow up, sorry.
Yes, thank you. My question was with regard to the the parking restrictions and the necessitation that this DA would require with regards to them. Again, I'm wondering what is the process for that in terms of what's included in the permit, and what would be a subsequent process to facilitate that if required?
Director Hurst.
Thanks, Mayor. The recommended condition 7, parking restrictions in St Leonard's, indicates that a plan of parking restrictions in St Leonard's Road and details of the completed public consultation are to be submitted for approval by the Director of Infrastructure Services, and once approved, the parking restrictions are to be installed at the applicant's expense and prior to the school operations starting on the site.
Thank you. Follow-up question.
Sorry to be a pain. Just wondering, in the correspondence attachment 4 from State Growth, just in terms of clarification, not on site but on the street, as a minimum it would be expected that some parking restrictions will need to be imposed in accordance with department standards. Due to the specific traffic peaks normally associated with schools, it is likely and acceptable to have timed no stopping restrictions. So I'm just wondering, outside of the site, what kind of restrictions would we be looking at imposing upon the St Leonard's residents with regard to this DA based on that correspondence attachment 4 from Gary Hills, at Senior Traffic Engineer at State Growth?
Thank you. Director Hurst.
Thank you, Mayor. If I'm understanding the question correctly, it does, the recommended condition 7 does relate to on-street parking restrictions, and I can't speak for the Director of Infrastructure Services, but I would think that the advice from the relevant state agency would be taken into account when the proposed parking restrictions are approved.
Perfect. Thank you.
Question? Councillor McKenzie?
Yes, I guess following on the theme of 368 and the access way, and I guess given the comments made by the first speaker today, there is obvious concern in going up and down that driveway for her as a shared driveway of it, and the ability for only one car to travel up and down that roadway at any given time. And noting the comments by GHD in regards to the ability to widen that road, would it not be appropriate to condition this application in relation to that, to make sure that that road is widened to ensure that there's ease of access for all the parties?
Director Hurst.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, if that were the wish, that could be done, but officers would require a little bit of time to prepare that condition.
Well, I'd like to see that. I don't know whether preparation of that. I'm not quite sure how we advance that, Mayor.
Well, it would have to be a motion, an amendment to the motion. A question? Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. Question to our Director of Planning. Just in the plans, is there provisions for more parking down the future at all? Has that been considered?
Director. Has there provision for more parking being allowed, being considered?
I'm sorry, could that question please be repeated?
The question was, is there provision for more parking in the future in regards to the plans? Has it been thought of that potentially the 18 new car parks aren't going to be enough if in the future there were to be more students approved on the site?
Thank you. Ian?
Thank you. At the moment, I guess we're dealing with what we have in front. The site's quite large, so there is possibilities for extensions in the future. That includes if they need to increase the numbers of students, which might increase the number of car parks. The ability's there, but we'll have to revisit that, and we'd have to have discussions with the school.
Did you want to test the meeting regarding laying it on the table?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to lay it on the table so we can put an amended.
Yeah, that's right. But we need to know the meeting agrees with that. That's moved. Is there a seconder for that?
We've got a draft now, though.
We've got a draft now.
We've got a draft now. Well, I'm happy to move if somebody read out what the draft says.
General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So, a draft to consider is prior to the use commencing on the site, the driveway at 368 St Leonard's Road must be widened to 6 metres for the first 30 metres. And then I can't read what that's saying. Into the site from St Leonard's Road. So from the first 30 metres into the site from St Leonard's Road. How's that?
I'm hearing that there may be a couple of other amendments that people wishing to seek, so maybe we should deal with them all at once.
So perhaps wait for other that wish to put amendments forward.
Yeah. Have we got any other speakers at this stage?
Can I speak to that?
You can speak, but then you can't speak later.
Mayor, yeah, I just want to speak to it.
Well, you need a mover or seconder to do that because the meeting procedure doesn't allow that.
I'm not seconding it.
Well, it's not. It's not a separate motion yet. It's just a. If somebody wants to move an amendment, that as an amendment, move Alderman Mackenzie.
I'm just querying whether Councillor Cox would like to speak firstly, and then whether there are other amendments that flow.
Yeah, but you're aware that if he speaks,
before I make the amendment.
If you're aware that when he speaks, it's the only chance he gets to speak. That's what he's not. That's where we're at. So just.
I'll just withdraw for the moment.
Any other speakers? Question from Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. With regard to the intended maximum of 102 students, and notwithstanding it's a school and presumably students who are in the highest grade incrementally will continue to move up a grade and more students will come on at the lower grades or otherwise, what is the current number of enrolled students total at the school? And when is the maximum of 102 students expected to be arrived at?
Director Hurst or Richard? Director Hurst.
Thank you, Mayor. We don't have the answer to that. We don't know that. We don't know the answer to that.
Any other speakers?
Good question.
Question? Councillor Finlay.
In terms of process, it's clear that there's a lot of data contained in the documentation. We have time to review that. We had an on-site meeting. There still seems to be a lack of comfort or security in making a decision at the moment. Would it be reasonable to ask that the matter lay on the table, that we ask the applicant for time to ask some questions to get response? The reason for my question being, and I know the General Manager hates this as a process, that approving an application where there's concern of creep, so we're approving something that might not actually be the full requirements of the application, is concerning for examples of other schools where we've got pressure. And I think that there's a lack of willingness at the moment. We don't have an active mover or seconder, and it might be just those points of clarification that need to come through for a decision to be made. I'm just sensing where the energy is at the table at the moment.
Well, I think you'd want it deferred in that case rather than lay on the table, but we can't on this unless the applicant agrees. Yeah. You speak to the motion now? Councillor Cox? Not at this stage.
Somebody's got to start me, sometimes I feel like I'm listening to an episode of Futurama. Somebody said a little while ago, planning should never be made with what the future holds, and that's what we're doing. We're talking about changing speed limits, we're talking about widening a road, we're talking about changing a footpath, we're talking about altering a driveway. Everything is into the future. We've got nothing in its current form. There is no way that I could possibly support this. I have nothing against the Sinus School. I think the Sinus School does a terrific job. This is not about that. This is about what I consider to be primarily a safety issue. In an ideal world, in my opinion, you would never, ever, ever build a school on a public highway. For the people that are not aware, St Leonard's Road is the major truck route for the southern part of the city. That's why there's so many trucks. That's why they're using it. It's their road. There will be some people parking up in the car park. How many? We're not sure. How many students? Not sure. Will they all park? Will the parents all park up in the car park? Probably not. Will some of them park down on the road? Will the children run down to jump in the car? Possibly, probably. Has it happened in the past? Yes, with tragic results. I cannot in any way, in good conscience, support this in its current form.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor. Following on from Councillor Cox, and I guess obviously Councillor Cox is someone who sat with some authority on a road safety council. I am always guided by his knowledge and expertise in that area. I'm just going to address, Mr Mayor, some of the things that have been mentioned by the speakers, and like others who know a little bit about the Steiner philosophy of education, it is a very sound, very well regarded from a philosophical and pedagogical viewpoint. It's something that delivers good outcomes. And I think we heard one of the speakers who had been through a school himself and talked of its benefits. When we sit as a planning authority, unfortunately, and I'm pleased, don't think I'm being facetious, if we were dealing with an application for a school for left-handed people who were over 185 centimetres tall, that doesn't count either. We're dealing with something at planning law. So that doesn't take away from the fact it's a great school, it delivers some great outcomes with the program that it has. I guess the concerns I have, Mr Mayor, and I did make this point in correspondence with people that contacted me and also with councillors who discussed this with me. A little while ago I had some concerns brought to me by the principal of the existing government school at St Leonard's, and it picked up a number of the things that we've heard today. Mr Woodward, a long-time resident out there, highlighted some things about trucks and vehicle movements, and he outlined all those wonderful developments going on out there. They're building a dam out of Downess. People use that road to end up out through there, for instance. So the existing school is having issues around safety with the volume of trucks and vehicle movements that are through that area. So to me, with safety in mind for me, I'm sort of thinking if we put another school nearby where there is an issue with safety, that safety issue is not going to go away. In fact, it would get worse because there are more movements. The other point that I would say, I guess, and like previous speakers, Mr Mayor, I know a little bit about how schools work. They are not just something that sits there completely without any movement for between the hours of 9 and 2:45. Schools are busy places. People come and go during the day, whether they be suppliers, other staff, visitors to the school, parents coming in to see a presentation or a concert or a performance or whatever. They're busy places. So, it isn't just a situation where people turn up at 8:30 and then come back at 2:30, 2:45 to pick their children up. One of the things, I guess, when we consider the movements of traffic around schools and traffic assessments, of course, assume, and I think Councillor Cox covered off on it pretty well, assumes that things will happen that don't usually happen if you've ever been around schools. And I know I've brought things to the attention of former Director Galea and current Director Eberhardt around traffic movements in and around schools. Unfortunately, people don't always have the sensible, by the book, follow the rules stuff that's picked up in things like traffic assessments. It doesn't happen. And if you've ever dropped a kid at school, see how many strange behaviours and unsafe behaviours you see around those areas, which is one of the reasons speed limits are so important. I'm interested, Mr Mayor, if there are going to be some more comments on this one. One of the other things which I guess Councillor Cox touched on, planning for the future, which is something I think as a city that it's beholden on us to do. What I think will happen, and I hope happens, is that the Steiner School seems to me to be going from strength to strength. It started as a little group of people up there in French Street. It's expanded. There's more people interested in it for the philosophical reasons, the educational reasons that Councillor Dawkins touched on. It's something that delivers some good outcomes. So what will happen, in my prediction of reading the tea leaves, it'll grow, it'll be successful, it'll be supported, it'll get bigger. There might, so I guess that poses more challenges. So I do hope others speak. I'm not comfortable with the traffic side of it, and listening to the long-term residents of St Leonard's Road, some of whom have been there 30, 40, 50 years, that contacted me. When they moved into the area, they were familiar with the fact that there was a school there. Absolutely. You accept that, you accept the movements and busyness that come with it, but as other things happen and make it busy, a lot of it's tourism related, as we've heard with other developments, dams, log trucks, etc. I've got some concerns. I don't want to see anyone hurt out there. And Mr Mayor, in conclusion, if traffic and vehicle safety and vehicle movements are an issue at the moment and they're being raised by the existing school, well, I think we need to be very, very careful about what we do. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor. A question just in regards to the traffic safety. Is there any provision that that has to be declared a school zone and therefore that there has to be traffic speed limits in that area, or is it because it's set off the road there's not a provision for that to be mandatory?
Director Hurst. Richard.
If I'm understanding the question correctly, it's not in the power of the Steiner School to make the footpath safe. That's a council responsibility, and it's not in the power of the Steiner School to lower the speed limit. So it can make its junctions conform with the acceptable standards for junctions for the amount of traffic that they have, and to make those safe by traffic engineering standards on their property, which is what they've done in the application, which is supported by the Traffic Impact Assessment and Council's Infrastructure Services and the State Road Authority.
I think the question was also getting at, if the school does come there, will there automatically be school signs up saying 40 and...
I think that's a matter that would follow the approval, but in all likelihood the Road Authority would be prepared to accept school signs and school zones and what have you. I think in the correspondence from Gary Hills, he does actually suggest that some of those things, he didn't think those were necessarily necessary because he didn't feel like a lot of students would be crossing the road. But as we discussed earlier, I think a lot of these things in the road reserve are managed by the Road Authority on an as-needs basis, rather than being dealt with specifically in the planning approval. There's two heads of power, and the council has a Road Authority hat, which it can make changes in the road reserve to parking, it can lobby for speed, it can upgrade the pavements, and it can do what's necessary if it becomes necessary, rather than necessarily having the school to do those before it gets approval. It's a little bit hard for the school to do those things before it gets approval.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Question or speaker? Question? Councillor Finlay.
I'm going to retest to the General Manager's discomfort the idea of time for clarification. I've just had the opportunity to clarify some data that's before us, and it's not consistent with the report documentation, and therefore I don't think it's useful in making the decision today. On page 4, it suggests, and this might be causing concern for councillors and therefore comfort to make a decision, it suggests that the 102 students will be for childcare, kinder, prep, primary and secondary students. And on page 8, it suggests that the proposal results in the total relocation of the existing Steiner School to the new location, which over time it might be. But in clarifying some data, at the moment the 102 students is likely to be the growth up to grade 6 without immediate intention of senior school. And then subject to how that goes with the business feasibility of the school, then intention to go further. And that initially the prep kindergarten would stay at French Street. So things like that, for me the concern is creep. And if we were able to perhaps have a clarifying document of the growth plans of the school, what's intended on the site, and therefore whether what the 102 means. Is it going to be asked to change again next year? We're approving something that we're a bit blind about. If we were able to lay the matter on the table, seek the approval of the applicant for a 2-week extension of time for a clarification around the business growth plans for the school, then that would give us comfort in making a decision in regards to, and it may give comfort to the community members in regards to what's going to happen from this step forward in the medium to short term.
Yeah, we're just going on what was said before. This is for an application for 102 students. If it increases, it'll have to come back to us as a council.
Aware of that, Mayor. I suppose my personal concern, not speaking for anybody else, is that in the event that it was intended that then in 12 months an application comes back for growth again, we're not really... So, and again, just with data I received, at the moment there are 49 students up to grade 6 and an extra 18 prep kinder. We're already at 70 without needed growth. And for me, it's sort of like if we approve something today and then in a couple of months or a year or so we're asked to improve something else, it would be just great to have that comfort in what we're approving, that is for medium term, not just short term, in terms of the potential, the impacts that the community have expressed in the area.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. And look, I understand what you're saying, but you haven't got the luxury. Basically, you need to determine it based on the merits of what's been applied for, and that is a maximum of 102 students. And with respect to future plans, that will be the issue that the school or the applicant will need to deal with if they were seeking to extend that later on. And I would imagine it's something that they've taken into account. But in terms of the council's role in this, it's really to sit in judgment of what's been applied for, and you haven't got the ability, with considering this application, to be able to, I guess, to be able to guess or to have conjecture around what might be. So largely what they're applying for is 102 students. If that is determined by council in the positive, then that's what they're restricted to, and then really it's up to them to resolve that moving forward. So.
Councillor Harris.
Yeah, that's better. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question from procedure point of view. I'd like to go back to what Councillor Mackenzie started to do with the 6 metre driveway widening on 368 St Leonard's Road. From a procedural point of view, my question is just to understand, we have the motion as it is before us, we amend that, we then would vote on that amendment, and then from that we would then vote on the amended motion with the widening of it. And so I'm not sure why everyone seems to be running away from moving the amendment, but I'm quite happy to move that amendment if it gets a seconder, and if that then stops us from going forward, well, it keeps us moving forward, I think it'll be well worthwhile.
Thank you for that as a statement rather than a question, but I accept that. That's all right. No, that's clarity. Alderman Mackenzie, Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I've listened to the conversation with interest, and I've been here for 7 years and probably had more questions in this particular item than I had in any planning matter that I've had since I've been here. So that in itself is a concern. If we've got that many questions that we've got there now, we've got competent planners, we've got competent consultants who are giving advice in regards to things. They're telling us what is being proposed is something that fits within the planning scheme and it works. I certainly have no issue with the Steiner School being there. I mean, I appreciate the St Leonard's School is further up the road. It's off the road. It's a lot, different sort of location, and I think that it would fit well within the municipality over time. And again, I agree with the General Manager. We're talking about a finite 102. That's what's been applied for. That's all we can make our decisions on. So we need to get over that side of things. So, but the trouble I've got is we keep coming back and the questions that have been coming around are the traffic management and the issues in relation to the road. I guess in past and only as recent as the last meeting, we had issues regarding traffic impact assessments in regards to other places, for other planning things. So I guess those seem to be things that give us as councillors significant angst when we look at something. We get a report that says it's okay, but the pub test concerns us that it doesn't look okay to us as users of roads and things like that. So we therefore make our own judgments, which are not based on any engineering backgrounds or anything like that, which I think is sometimes very dangerous. I guess my concern is, and I started out thinking that I was going to support this whole bolus, and I support the school and its intent and what it's trying to do. I've listened to the people who have spoken today and have rung me up and sent me emails during the last 2 or 3 weeks in relation to the issues that they still have. There's an element of fear factor there, I'm sure, because it's something different, it's something new, it's something they're not used to within their, within the realms of that. So that will account for some of the conversation and some of the comments that are being made. However, I still have issues with the 368 access. I still have issues with the fact that we don't have a footpath that runs all the way down St Leonard's Road. I still have some issues about understanding the safety of the access or the egress and ingress onto the site in relation to some of the comments that have been made. I guess my view would be, and I'm not trying to read the tea leaves here as to what the outcome of the debate might be, but it's going to be touch and go, I think, if we put this to a vote. I would be suggesting that perhaps it might be of value for this to lay on the table or to be withdrawn and replaced, brought back in a couple of weeks' time, where we've had some more chance to look at those aspects of the of the road safety aspects, because I think that's going to drive a lot of the decisions today. So I would consider that we should maybe go back to the applicant to see whether they'd be prepared to defer it for 2 weeks. Yep. I'll move that we lay it on the table. To do that? To ask that question?
All those in favour of that, please raise your hand. Those against? So that's carried. Correct. Thank you. So that'll lay on the table. Come back to us shortly. We'll go on to the next item, which is 8.2. Sorry? Oh, okay. Yeah, we've still got to do it though. Yeah, well, yeah. We'll see how we go. So, on to 8.2. We have some speakers for 8.2. Oh, Karina can come back. Thank you, councillors, and quiet, please. So we have speakers for 8.2, 94 Arthur Street. First one is Lindsay Clark.
Good afternoon, Council. My name's Lindsay Clark. I live at Unit 5, 59 William Street in the city. My wife and I own a property at 4 My Street, and my sister-in-law owns a property at 2 My Street. We're concerned about the development application. I have two objections. One relates to the right-of-way and the easement access at the rear of the property. Very concerned about the implications that the development will have on those. A number of people in adjoining properties have used the right-of-way for more than 30 years, and that needs to be maintained. Second objection relates to car parking. My street is a single lane road, and current parking in the area is very limited. This development application will increase parking requirements in the area and so add to the current problem. Thank you.
Thank you. And the second speaker is Margaret Egan. She left since, or anyone else wish to speak to this item? No? So we don't know who Margaret Egan is. She did leave? Okay. We haven't got a number to ring up. I suppose it'd be too late anyway. So. Okay, we'll move on. 8.2. Somebody happy to move a motion? Alderman Mackenzie, move it as is. Oh, Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Finlay seconded. Do you wish to speak to it?
I will, Mr Mayor. I guess the issue with this particular block of land is that we're not actually assessing whether something's going to be built on it at this point in time. It's really assessing a block of land to be subdivided with a view that maybe some future development may take place with it, but there is no requirement at this stage to look at any potential development in relation to this particular block of land. Our officers have assessed it, and I agree it's a strange block of land with rights of way and funny looking shapes on them, which get included in the total volume of the land that's used to make an assessment in relation thereto. Now, again, the question was raised in regards to the right-of-way. As far as I understand, the right-of-way is the right-of-way, and it continues until such time as somebody determines it's not a right-of-way any longer. So that would need to be changed by statute or law, I would have thought, to change any of the requirements of that. If you look at the documentation, whether I like or don't like what's being done, the reality of it is there is a building envelope which the planners have managed to draw in relation to it, 10 by 12. So there is a potential building envelope on that particular block of land, which would enable the subdivision to be done. I suspect the issues are going to become on when something is decided to be built on that block of land at some stage in the future. But that's not what we're here to actually assess today. We're here to assess whether the subdivision should be allowed on the basis that there is a subdividable block in relation to this particular item. And I believe that it is something that the planning law is quite clear on. I think we need to approve this today.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay?
Thanks, Mayor. Happy to speak to this item. I think there are a few slight peculiarities with the application before us. When we receive subdivisions, often the way that the land is divided and the land area is considered for future application is really clear. You've got a rectangular block, you divide it in half or something close to that, and you've got an amount of land. This one has a curious shape to it, and so therefore the amount of land that's left over for use is perhaps slightly, it's true, but it slightly misrepresents the opportunity to develop on that site. However, taking that into context, I think that the small amount of land that will usefully be able to be developed as a result of the subdivision, although small, and you can only estimate what it might actually really be, 250, so somewhere around that, 250 to 300, whatever that might be, that it is possible in the future to receive an application, although I suspect we'll absolutely have discretion for a development on the site. For me, I'm comfortable with this, and it's a bit different to the previous item, because in approving this, you also get to approve what actually is going to physically happen on the site next. But I foreshadow that at the time a future application comes before the council, it will be absolutely meticulously assessed in order that it doesn't breach with unreasonableness all of the discretions in the scheme, because it will need I think, a creative, high-value, interesting development on the site for it to be used. But it is central Launceston, walkable, all sorts of things. I think it is the type of infill development that we, or subdivision for future development that we can encourage in Launceston. I think it's possible to do something interesting on it, and that therefore is the reason why it has my support today. But the second step will require absolute interrogation by us at that time.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor, yes, speak. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't feel like I'm making an overly positive contribution today, but I must say that I was disappointed to note that we'd been picked up from an advertising and communication point of view in terms of the neighbours. 3 people that contacted me were disappointed with regard to having to follow up the nature of not receiving information about the proposed subdivision, and also, I guess, with regard to the extension of time. As per regulations, we're permitted to provide an additional 14 days, but they were all days while the council was closed. And as a result, people who wanted to speak with officers with regard to the application, it made it very difficult. It was extended until the 7th of January. And that made it particularly difficult for people who wanted to interrogate it further. So I guess I understand the nature of the subdivision, and at this juncture I'm going to support it and wait and see what comes at the next iteration that's put before us. But I do hope that we have learnt from that and continue to refine that, because it's disappointing on planning grounds when we get picked up on our communication and our consultation with neighbours.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor McKenzie, you wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Are we right for 8.1 or not yet? No? Yes? Go back to 8.1.
Thank you, Mayor. The applicant has agreed to a 2-week extension, but officers will require specific advice from council as to what further information they would like us to follow up on in those 2 weeks, please.
Have they withdrawn it, or?
They've agreed to an extension of 2 weeks for the determination date.
That's my point.
They have agreed to give an extension of 2 weeks for the matter to be determined.
So it's off the table. We have to defer it, do we? Okay. Someone happy to move that it be deferred? Well, Councillor Soward was first, and seconder, Councillor Spencer. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is carried. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, yeah. That's the next thing.
So certainly 368, the extension of the driveway, or the widening of the driveway, I think is certainly something that we should be considering.
The footpath? Yeah, but she's asking questions. Your director wants information on what to look at.
And we'll provide advice as to whether they're planning matters or not.
So do you want to do that now or else other time?
No, we just want to know what
Now.
we need to be following up on in the next 2 weeks before it comes back.
What? Or safety, obviously.
Move for the officers to consider the extension of the width of the driveway, is it 368? And a statement to be included from the school in terms of future growth plans, including student numbers and site relocation.
Councillor Walker?
Further to my question earlier, I would like some clarity over the concept of a school zone, whether this fits that category, whether that's a state government or a local government responsibility. Well, I'll get that clarity. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll leave it there, and you can always add
and
later.
any additional signage and things that go with that.
Thank you. I think we'll discuss this outside. Get on with the meeting for the other matters that we have before us.
Sorry, could I just ask a procedural question, Mayor?
You may.
Sometimes when we've done this, the matter that has come before us simply is copied and pasted and returned. So I do think it's important. There's a motion at the moment from Alderman Finlay as to direction as asked by the Director. Do you need a seconder for that motion in order that the item that's been presented to us today is not simply replicated in 2 weeks' time?
Thank you. General Manager?
No, I don't, look, it's not a motion that can be properly put and have the professional advice to be able to, for you to be able to consider it. So my view is officers have listened to the debate, we've listened to the issues, and we will bring the matter back for the council to consider those that are able to be considered within the remit of the Land Use Planning Approvals Act.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to 8.3. We do have some speakers again for 8.3. I think they're all here for the beginning, so Barbara Turner. I will just give a minute for those that want to leave, feel free. Thank you, Barbara. Yep, you may speak.
Mayor, councillors, thanks for your time. I'm Barbara Turner. I live at 222 Vermont Road. There's a proposal of 7 large blocks in front of us, obstructing the river view that we have. When we purchased the block in 2004, I inquired about the zoning of the land, and it was rural with scenic protection. We had 3 sheds on our block, and 1 being asbestos. It was a relatively inexpensive block, so we took into account of the removal of these sheds, and so we purchased the block, thinking that the land in front was rural and that we'll have that view forever. I did ask Jared Murray, who is the developer of this block, if we could move the boundaries so the proposed house right on my fence line, because I happen to be 50 metres away from the railway line, if it could be slightly in between the 2 houses, so we could still keep our outlook and our neighbour could still keep their outlook. For some reason, that was a negative. He wasn't agreeable to that. So then I asked if block 2 and lot 1 could be incorporated, so the proposed site could be still put between the 2 houses, so we could still keep our outlook. That was also not agreeable. I was interested to hear that he was he graduated from Steiner, because part of their mission statement is to be a good citizen and to have integrity. And I think that I asked him if he would like someone to build right in front of his fence line, would he like it? And he actually said no, he wouldn't like that. So I just think that we should take into account that we did buy this block of land with this outlook, and we would like to continue to keep it.
Thank you. Your time is up. Thank you very much. Tobias White.
G'day there, my name's Tobias White of Unit 22, 927 Lambert Street. I also own the property of 256 Vermont Road, and I'd like to thank the Mayor and the councillors for this opportunity to speak. I'd like to firstly bring to the attention to a mistake with the address in the endorsed plan section. It reads 204 instead of 240. On reading the report, I also see that there were on-site meetings with residents. However, I was never notified, I never received notification of these meetings, and that a covenant was added to cover lots 1 and 5. I would like to ask that there will be the following amendments and covenants be added: that all covenants cover all lots and not leave lots 6 and 7 out, even if they are larger. Only one single-storey dwelling and one outbuilding be allowed, as that is what has been assessed, even though the zoning allows for more. That the driveway be of seal construction to prevent noise and dust. All vegetation should not get above 2 metres, and no new hedges or similar plantings that would break up the open rural nature of this site. All fences should be of rural construction, in keeping with the lot's rural open feeling. I would also like to make the following points: that there seems to be a difference of opinion on the appropriate zoning for the lot. There is more direct impacts to residents than just loss of views such as noise, privacy and odours, and those things listed in section 17, amenities. That the driveways are assessed on an annual average daily traffic, where one could consider these lots to be larger than average, and therefore traffic may also be greater due to the potential occupancy more than average number of cars, and the fact that there's no nearby shops and schools.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jared Murray of Upton Street, Launceston. I'm the proponent of the development. 204 Vermont Road has been zoned low-density residential for many years. The subdivision proposed complies with the acceptable solutions for a subdivision in the low-density residential zone. Despite the minimum lot size of 1,500 square metres for this zoning, our proposal is of a much lower density and will have a reduced impact on surrounding residents as a result. We are creating 7 quality, affordable lots that will appeal to families who want to live close to the CBD while also having space around them. The proposal includes landscape designs incorporating native plants, communal gardens and a shared driveway for residents that will add to the streetscape. As shown in the bushfire report that is attached to the application, the development is not bushfire prone and will reduce any risk to the existing neighbouring properties. We have kept the neighbours informed throughout the process. I've dropped in letterboxes on a couple of occasions. I've met with residents who have got in touch with me and council as well. We have proposed measures to address many of their concerns as outlined in the representation from Bill Turner on behalf of a group of neighbours. And the subdivision before you represents a very compliant use and appropriate use of the land zone. And I hope that you can agree with the recommendation of your planning officers to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? No, thank you. So item 8.3, someone happy to move the motion? Councillor Finlay, moved as is. Seconded. Councillor Harris. You wish to speak, Councillor Finlay? Councillor Harris? Any councillor wish to speak? Councillor McKenzie.
An application like this requires somebody to speak in relation to it. I take into account comments made by the proponent who just spoke, and I guess the comments made through the report in that he has discussed with a number of people. I take on board the comments made by 2 of the neighbours in relation to issues that are going to impact upon them. I feel a little bit sorry from the point of view that it was a rural zoning, and as explained to us today on our bus trip by the council officers, the actual change of the zoning was actually not something that was done by council, it was actually done by State Planning Commission. So whether we like it or not, that is the zoning that we are dealing with today, and the proponent has put forward an application that fits within the zone requirements. He's negotiated with those people that he has spoken to in relation to it. I know I'm disappointed that one of the persons speaking today, which I was only aware of 5 minutes ago or 3 minutes ago, that he wasn't made aware of the whole thing. So I'm not sure whether there's any opportunity for any compromise in relation to heights and covenants in relation to 6 and 7. But unfortunately, we don't have that with us today, unless the proponent is prepared to discuss that, but I suspect he probably wants to go forward with it. So in relation to the issue in front of us, I feel sorry for the lady who's got the one in Lot 1, because there really isn't a lot of boundary, as we're aware, between her site and the railway line, which makes the building of any future building there is going to be compromised on your boundary line, and I can see that as being an issue if I lived there as well. Having said that, I still have concerns that we are, well, not concerns. The fact is that the development application actually meets the requirements of the scheme, and as a consequence of that, I don't think we have any basis on which to knock it back.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Any other speakers from Council? Councillor Finlay, wish to? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That's all councillors present. That is carried. We move on to 8.4, the Amendment 47. A speaker as well, Alison Baker.
Hi, I'm speaking against the rezoning of land on 38A Faulkner Road. I'm Alison Baker and I live on 111 Ravenswood Road. My main concern is, like in the previous one, my outlook and also privacy. I note in response in the council agenda to my issue of privacy, the response said the proposed amendment is to rezone the property only with no development proposed. The amendment cannot consider privacy based on assumptions only. If we were to go based on that belief, then there would be no reason to change the zoning. Why would you change a zoning without an assumption that there would be a development? If the zoning was approved, then that would mean that you're assuming that there would be a development on there. And then that would breach 10.4.6 privacy for dwellings, as the property at 38 Faulkner Road is elevated above my property and would have a direct view into my backyard and into windows along my back of my property. I also like to note that earlier on today that planning did say they would make decisions based on ultimate use, which therefore I think it is relevant that there would be a proposed development in the future. I'd also like to note that I believe that other planning applications should be taken into account in relation to current planning matters. For example, a development along Vermont Road, a development along St Leonard's Road and a development in Ravenswood all impact the traffic within that area. If you ever drive...
Your time's up. Thank you. 8.4. Anyone will move a motion? We're all quiet. Councillor Mackenzie, seconded by Councillor Finlay. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I do, Mr Mayor, and again today is just about the rezoning of the property. A future development application, I take on board the comments made by the Speaker that it foreshadows that there will be some form of development application that will come forward at some future date. Unfortunately today that's not what we're about, and that's something that we'll need to take on and deal with on its merits at the point in time. Given the advice that was given previously and the advice of the council planners, I believe we should move forward with this application today.
Thank you, Councillor Finlay. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. I just now no longer sit as a planning authority. Yes, Councillor Sauer.
I was just going to ask if Councillor Walker's happy. He's obviously got a notice of motion. There's a number of people in the gallery who have waited patiently. If we could bring that forward.
I was going to suggest that, so well done. So it's moved by Councillor Sauer that we move it forward. Is there a seconder? I'll get Councillor Mackenzie to second it. All those in favour? That is all councillors present. That is carried. So we now move on to 14.1 regarding Councillor Walker's motion. We have a couple of speakers. Nancy Serisia. Oh.
Good afternoon. I'm Nancy Serisia, 25 West Park Drive, West Launceston. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the owners of this land as being the Aboriginal people and pay respect to elders past and present. What does Australia Day, held on the 26th of January, celebrate, and why is it definitely not an appropriate day to hold citizenship ceremonies? I volunteer with the Migrant Resource Centre, tutoring refugee people from Bhutan and Sudan, preparing them for their citizenship tests. We're required to teach them the fact that Australia Day celebrates the arrival of the First Fleet. We're not required to teach them the words of Paul Keating, former Prime Minister, in regard to the arrival of these early white settlers. Quote, "We took the traditional lands, we smashed the traditional way of life, we brought disease, we brought alcohol, we committed murders," end of quote. In regard to Aboriginal history taught to these migrants, preparing them for the citizenship test, all it covers is the Aboriginal flag and the Torres Strait Island flag and some interpretation. No mention of illness, disease, despair, encroachment on hunting grounds that the First Fleet set in motion. Migrants are not given inclusive information, and Australia Day is not an inclusive day. Therefore, January the 26th is a bad day to have it, not a good day for Australian citizenship celebrations. It's a day dreaded by most Aboriginal people, by many white people such as myself as well. So, Mayor and councillors, I'd really like you to have the courage to display some culturally sensitive empathy and respect for Aboriginal people. And please don't hold citizenship ceremonies on Australia Day. And thanks, Tim Walker, for bringing this to the table.
Thank you. Adam Thompson, Charles Street, Launceston. I'm in support of Alderman Walker's motion, and we thank Tim for putting that up. Launceston has a very proud population of Aboriginal people. There's a few of us here today, and as Mayor Van Zetten said earlier, we have a very long association with this place. In the 1950s and 60s, the majority of people that were forced off the islands, Cape Barren Island and the others, moved to Launceston, and that was due to government assimilation policies of the time. People had a very difficult time. There's a lot of racism. People were presented with few opportunities. They weren't regarded as being Aboriginal, and they were discriminated against also because of the colour of their skin. It is my view, and many of our view, that the city of Launceston has never really been there for Aboriginal people, and that our interests were never really taken seriously. And now in 2019, we still have a almost non-existent relationship with the council. Today, you have an opportunity to do something for us and for Aboriginal Australia in general, and also for the wider community, to support Alderman Walker's motion to change the date of Australia Day activities to a non-offensive date, and to begin a new and much better relationship with the Aboriginal community. Thanks.
Any other speakers? Thank you. So, Councillor Walker, you wish to move the motion? Is there a seconder? Councillor Dawkins, thank you. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Walker?
Yes, I do, Mayor. Thank you. And I thank the members of Tasmania's Aboriginal community for coming here today in support of this motion, and I acknowledge that this is Aboriginal land that we meet on. It always was and it always will be. I'm not about to wax rhetorical about the reasons why my fellow councillors should support this motion today. I've purposely avoided lobbying you, as I think you must all take the responsibility for this significant moment in our council's history. There's strong feelings in the community, obviously, about January 26 on both sides, just as there may be around this table. But this isn't about feelings. This is about what's right and what's just, what's inclusive and what's enlightened. I've written this notice of motion specifically with the thoughts of the whole community in mind. This motion does not preclude people or groups marking this day as they would mark any other day that they personally wish to celebrate. It doesn't remove the public holiday, and it doesn't deny the significance of the date, 26th of January. It asks that the Council do three simple things: to stop actively supporting this divisive day in Australia's recent history, to consult with our Aboriginal community, and to encourage the federal government to address this growing divide in our community over a contentious celebration that's insulting not just to Aboriginal communities and members of the Aboriginal community, but to a growing number of non-Aboriginal Australians. For 231 years, Anglo-European culture has dominated over that of the existing custodians of this land. The simple question to answer is whether we, as a council, as a city, and ultimately as a nation, choose to continue to support this oppression of a culture via the celebration of a day that represents not the forming of our great nation, not the unity of our purpose, not inclusiveness or tolerance, but represents the sorrow and subjugation of an entire culture. And this is not about denying history, as some might have you believe. It's about the opposite. It's an act of recognition, recognising that prior cultures existed in Australia, that immense pain and hardship came from dispossession and destruction of those cultures, recognising that as a nation, we are yet to meet our Aboriginal brothers and sisters as equals and create a binding agreement, a treaty if you will, that will provide a wonderful path for our country to move forward. This is about acknowledging history and seeing January 26th for what it is, a potent symbol of colonial ignorance over understanding. For those who might argue today that we need community consultation, I'll leave you with this. You're elected to show leadership, to be fearless in your quest to create an inclusive community. Does consulting the majority about the rights of a minority to feel included in the country their ancestors occupied for 60,000 years sound like a reasonable proposition to you? Or does it sound a little like the continuation of a pattern of 231 years of cultural genocide? Make no mistake, this day will change. We will have another date to celebrate one day soon in this country. But we have the opportunity to contribute to that change today. It's in our hands. History cannot be undone. We'll always know the significance of January the 26th, both for European and for Aboriginal cultures. But it is not a worthy date to celebrate this great country. We can act now to make a greater history together. The future of Australia beckons for us to walk together, and I employ each of the councillors here to support my motion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
I'm proud to second Councillor Walker's motion. I've spent hours thinking about how to approach this statement. I've had moments in my personal history which have cemented my strongly held feelings about the right to self-determination for Aboriginal people in Tasmania. The moment when a young Aboriginal boy in primary school had to sit and listen to a teacher say that he and his people didn't exist. Reading The Harrowing and Challenging Van Diemen's Land by James Boyce, and attending Invasion Day rallies in Hobart and Devonport for the coming together of the Aboriginal peoples and their supporters to claim a change of date for the day known as Australia Day. The commemoration of the date, Arthur Phillip arrived at Sydney Cove, a date we've been holding events on nationally only since 1994, a day which younger Australians have claimed as a summer holiday for their amusement rather than a sense of national commemoration. I don't want to trivialise this or assume any pretence that I speak for Aboriginal people, the Palawa people, the first people of this place. I speak for myself and for the people who have voted for me, and I know that there will be an expectation that I will take every opportunity to voice for the cessation of council-sponsored celebrations on 26th of January. Councils around Australia have been moving in this direction for some time, and councils in Tasmania are doing the same. We can step through this process. We can stop funding and commemorating a day that divides our community. We have failed to reach out to the Aboriginal community and to listen to them. Really listen. Not go in with fixed ideas of an outcome, but discuss with an open mind and, more importantly, an open heart. Understanding that changing the date is one stage in the significant steps Australians are being asked to take to show respect for the First Peoples of this place. Every time I hear Australia named up as one of the most successful multicultural nations, I wonder how Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples feel hearing this. We haven't demonstrated that success when considering the Aboriginal community. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are a proud people, the longest unbroken chain of culture on the planet. We have a chance here today to show Launceston's Aboriginal community that we see them, we hear them, and we want to embrace a date that we can all get behind to celebrate a nation coming together. To support Councillor Walker's motion, to consult with the Tasmanian Aboriginal community, to make this our last Council-sponsored Australia Day, and to lobby for change at a federal level. I worry that if we don't support this motion today, that we embark upon meaningless consultation, which will not ask the very people who are the most deeply affected by this how we should proceed. Continuing to celebrate this day is an insult to our First Nations people, and I ask you to search in your heart to find empathy, to find compassion, to support a date which we can be backed by all of us, a real day of community celebration and pride. A day of truth.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Dakins.
Like Councillor Dawkins, I've thought long and hard about this motion and how to answer it. Spoken to a lot of friends and family and colleagues. Recently, only yesterday, the Australian of the Year voted no to change. Jeff Kennett, love him or hated, voted yes to change. The Prime Minister, obviously, he voted no to change. You can continue to ask many, many people, and it's no, yes, no, yes. And I agree that the yes to change is in the minority. I agree that the minority and the leaders need to stand up and say, we'd like to change. I think we need to look at a date, not just talk about change, not just talk about not recognising Australia Day, 26th of January, but look at what future date and what that date would mean. There's a number of dates that have been discussed in the press, in Parliament, and I think we need to continue that. I think, though, to start that step, as Councillor Walker has put forward today, we need to stand up. I know which way I'll be voting. I'd also like to ask, if I can ask a question, Mr Mayor, in this statement, what council-sponsored events would not be going ahead if this motion got passed? That'll be answered after. Thank you. My other, I suppose, closing statement is in 1788, 26th of January. We all know that date. That was the day that our original landowners and traditional landowners were, in their eyes, not the original landowners from that day forward. In 2003, the Tasmanian government, through Parliament, decided again to recognise the original and traditional landowners. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Councillor Dakin. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor.
Sorry, a question.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Typically, the council celebrated or recognised Australia Day through holding a citizenship ceremony in which it also confers Australia Day awards on that day, and in more recent times there's been barbecues that have been held in association with other events in Civic Square, in City Park. So.
Thank you.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Walker for bringing the motion to the table today, because I guess I'll start with my own personal view. I agree that we should change Australia Day. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever where the minority of people, our minorities are treated improperly. I wake up every day is Australia Day for me. And so therefore what day I celebrate it on is not important to me in the context of what day that is, because it is every day. And to the people of the Aboriginal backgrounds, I can understand why you wouldn't like that as a day to celebrate. So you have my full support in relation to that matter, and that's personal support. I'm also a believer in reconciliation. I chair an organisation that is involved in reconciliation plans, and if you read the reconciliation discussions, they would say Australia Day should change as well. So that supports that notion as well. What I'm standing here today is in the context of a councillor of Launceston City Council, or City of Launceston, and I have to also make sure that I'm representing all the people of Launceston and what their views may or may not hold, and also what the ramifications of making decisions that we may make in other aspects of what we do. My concern is I don't know what some of the ramifications might be. Some of them might be that we can't get funded for various things that the General Manager's mentioned. There are things like city deals. There are a number of other aspects that we rely on federal governments who so at this stage support maintaining Australia Day, and have made comments along the lines that, you know, if you don't support Australia Day, then there are certain ramifications which will occur to councils. So as a consequence of that, you know, we've got all these dichotomies. That's not to say that that's right or wrong. It is a fact of life that we have to deal with in relation to making decisions in relation to the Australia Day thing. I come in here today with the motion without the background knowledge of what the ramifications for the broader Launceston populace in relation to making that decision might be, which challenges me somewhat. It doesn't make it the right thing to do today. So I just wanted to foreshadow that if this motion doesn't get up, I'd like to foreshadow that I'd move another motion that following conclusion of the Australia Day on 26th of January 2019, the City of Launceston agrees to review its current policy position of recognising Australia Day on this day each year. Such a review would need to be completed in the first half of the year. So I'd like to just put that forward in case this motion doesn't get up, on the basis that I'd like this conversation to continue if we don't get the result today that endorses a change of Australia Day. I'm a person who has strong beliefs personally, unfortunately also a pragmatist, which makes life extremely challenging sometimes in making decisions that the heart should say you should be very easy to do. And for me, the decision from the heart is very easy to do. I would vote for a change of the date. I'd like to have some certainty about what the date might look like if it wasn't the 26th of January. I certainly have no problem in being publicly recorded as an individual who believes that we should change Australia Day. But today, I would like to see more work done on what implication it has to the City of Launceston post a decision like this, so that we can go in with our eyes open in relation to what impacts beyond this. And hopefully out of that, we actually get a better result for everybody.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor. Like others before me, I'd like to commend and congratulate Councillor Walker for bringing this to us, and I know obviously of his passion, and I heard that in his words today in moving the motion, so I'd like to acknowledge that. Like previous speakers, and I'm sure others to come, I've had some difficulty for some time with this day and where it is. All of us here will bring a different perspective to the debate from our backgrounds, our beliefs, how we were raised, our education. I was someone, when I studied at university, I did a history major, and I was in a number of classes with Councillor Walker. So one of the things that always bothered me with the term, if you like, Australia Day being on that date was that it actually, if you know anything about history, it was actually a day where I guess the colony of New South Wales was sort of proclaimed, I think, by Governor Phillip, and then obviously over time that phrase Australia Day was used, which is one that doesn't sit well with me. because the colony of New South Wales isn't anything to do with Australia, notwithstanding the Indigenous impact we've talked about. The other thing too, Mr Mayor, for me in speaking to this today, it's impossible for me to stand here and say what it must feel like on the 26th of January for our Aboriginal people that have spoken in the Aboriginal community, because I'm not Aboriginal, so I don't stand here saying I can speak and know the hurt and angst and fear and loathing and upset that it brings them. I can't do that. So, other than to say that I don't think it is the right day. If you said to me, Mr Mayor, what should a national day be, and I'll use that phrase, national day, a national day to me should be a day that brings a community together, brings a country together, brings a state. That's, to me, philosophically, if I had a sheet of paper and a pen and had to write down what a national day should be, that to me is what it should be. Is the 26th of January that date? Absolutely not. It divides the country, and one of the things that probably upsets me more than anything when it's talked about is that we end up with this, you're either for them or you're against them. This extreme debate where some horrible things get said, some angst, some upset, and that to me is not what Australia's about. The challenge, Mr Mayor, like all Councillor Mackenzie and others have said, to me, and I can only speak for me here and I'm talking about my feelings on this, is that we have to have something that brings people together, and we have to have something that's got some leadership with it. And I know that Councillor Walker's asking us as a council to bring some leadership to this one. If you ask me what I think would fix this, is I would love to see at a federal level some federal leadership from the federal government where they sit down and they echo the words of Councillor Walker and other Councillor Dawkins and others that have spoken, and the speakers before, and say, this date isn't right for our national day. That's to me what a federal government should do. This date isn't right for our national day. That's what I'd love for them to say. My fear, and there are a number of councils around Australia, not just Tasmania, that have taken an approach of doing something else, is that in some ways that, to me, can divide the argument a little, in that Meander might do something one day, Brighton Council might do something another day, Launceston potentially, wherever. And that to me creates further division, to me. I'd like to see a national day. One of the things, Mr Mayor, I mentioned earlier in my remarks as someone that studied a bit of history, and I've had some discussions, like many, with others in the community. I've said I'm in support of moving Australia Day. And to me, the true Australia Day is the 1st of January, because that is the day that the 6 states became the Commonwealth of Australia. Can't argue with that. 1st of January 1901. Up until then, the 6 states operated independently. They printed their own stamps, had their own tax systems. If you go and talk about railway gauges, Queensland and New South Wales different. They operated as different colonies. On the 1st of January was the day Australia was born. So I've taken that to the people that say to me, change the day. And do you know what they say to me? They say, we'd lose holiday. Well, it's New Year's Day, Rob. What are you talking about? And I'm saying, what's important to you? Is it more important to have a holiday, or is it more important to have a day that is the proper day that we became Australia? Now, I like to think, Mr Mayor, I'm reasonable and I'm open to having my opinions influenced, but no one is ever going to convince me that that is not the day the country of Australia, the Commonwealth of Australia, was born. Because it's there, it's true, it's in legislation. So good luck anyone trying to change me on that one. So that to me... A little extension, thank you.
Moved by Councillor Mackenzie, seconded by Councillor Cox. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you.
So that to me is the day that should be a national day. Now, I know that that's not popular. You know, you want to take a holiday off people. Some people get gnarly about that. Well, this is a bigger issue than a holiday. It really is. And the other thing I'm not about, and again, I'm only speaking personally from my viewpoint, I'm not into contriving another day. I'm not into dreaming up another day that again will be open to, attack. So if we said, well, why don't we shift it to, I've had people say, oh, May the 8th because it's mate. Oh, really? If you walk around Australia and you talk to a lot of multicultural people, what does the word mate mean? It doesn't mean, it's not, we're not riding around on horses and the man from Snowy River. So to me, that is the only day. I'll be interested on hearing the rest of the debate. I think it is something that we need to do. But my fear, as I said, is if councils go off, that is my fear, if councils go off doing their own thing, to me, it divides the issue more. And I touched on it with a couple of councillors earlier when we were chatting about it. We could have situations in Tasmania with 29 councils where there could be all sorts of ramifications for people that live and work and do great things in different areas. You could live in Launceston, work in a different area, be acknowledged in an award and whatever. So I thank Councillor Walker for bringing it forward. I've enjoyed the debate so far. I'm happy to go on the record that we've got to change it. 1st of January for me is the only date for the reasons I've said. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Soward, for his words. Like him and other speakers before us, I've also struggled a little bit with what is the right day, because clearly Australia Day should be a day of celebration for the whole community. Recent polls still show that 70% of Australians believe Australia Day should be on the 26th of January, but in reality that was the day that a prison was started in Sydney Cove, and 1,000 people landed on shore to do that. I do feel, though, that as Councillor Soward said, this is a problem for the federal government, not necessarily for local government. It is a national holiday. It isn't something that, whilst we can move the motion and feel better, will actually change necessarily what the federal government do, but that's where we need leadership. We do need leadership at a federal level to look at this day. Some other days that have been proposed, other than the 1st of January, and I agree again that Federation Day would be a good day for it, but once again the holiday raises its head. Perhaps some other days could be considered. The 13th of February was actually the day that Kevin Rudd gave the apology to the Parliament. The 9th of May was actually the day the Constitution passed our Parliament in probably Melbourne, because of in 1901, or even the 9th of July when the Constitution passed the British Parliament, and couldn't that be jolly dapper? But the reality is we do have to find a day that all people have to get behind, but I don't believe that this is necessarily something that the council should be doing at this stage. We should not ease up on our federal politicians. We should continue to lobby them. That'll do me. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with the past three speakers. Look, I agree. The day is not an ideal day. It's not a good day. We know that. What is the right day? Damned if I know. I don't know. I really like Councillor Mackenzie's motion, and just for the benefit of those that have forgotten, his motion is that following conclusion of the Australia Day on 26th of January, which, let me remind, is only a couple of days away, the City of Launceston agrees to review its current policy position of recognising Australia Day on this day each year. Such a review would need to be completed in the first half of the year. So he's given you a time frame, he's given you a suggestion. He hasn't given us a date because that's up for others. I mean, I can remember, Councillor Dakin mentioned a moment ago about the reconciliation. I can remember a former Premier, Jim Bacon, and I was fortunate enough to be with him. And he worked very closely with Ida West. And that was a sight to behold. That was a daily, almost a love affair. And it got somewhere. So rather than jump and say, we're going to do this 2 days later, we're going to do this in another time, let's take a deep breath, because for every action there will be a negative reaction, or vice versa. What we're going to get, what we're going to lose, I don't know. There'll be consequences, but there'll be some good ones. So let's just put it to one side for a couple of days. Let's take the advice of our very, very learned and astute Councillor Mackenzie, and I would urge others to have a very serious look at bringing this motion on as a substitute for a knee-jerk reaction right now. And I mean nothing against your motion at all this time, Tim. I just see it as a wider thing, giving us a greater, perhaps a greater result.
Thank you. Councillor Stosenchek.
I stand today to support the motion before us. While traditionally a strong advocate for community consultation, I believe on some issues which adversely affect a minority within our community, we need to show strong leadership. Right now, Australia Day is not a celebration for everyone. For Indigenous Australians, it marks the beginning of hundreds of years of suffering and inequality. Similar to the marriage equality campaign, change will come from the ground up on this issue. So let's lead and send a message that it's time to develop a more respectful and inclusive day of national celebration for all Australians.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I've been sitting here contemplating what some of the speakers said when they spoke to us, and the thing that I can't get past is the disappointment that I have in my heart that the City of Launceston is not working with the Aboriginal people in our community, and I'm really disappointed at that because I don't think that's true. There are so many examples of the ways that our council has grown, has developed, and is trying really hard to partner with the Aboriginal community. And in almost everything we do, we try so hard to consult, to utilise the reference group, to use the knowledge of elders, to speak as part of Reconciliation Week, to work and mentor with young people, to ensure that our northern suburbs development plans have aspects that are inclusive, open, welcoming of Aboriginal young people. And so I'm really disappointed if that is the feel from all members of the Aboriginal community. I remember the time and the effort that went into the development of our first People's exhibition at the QV Mag, and the pride that I had, and I know this council had, when that exhibition was opened. And if that, together with all of the things that this council is doing in working with our Aboriginal community, is not regarded and is not considered working with the Aboriginal community, I'm really disappointed at that.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. Scott Morrison in the Daily Mail has anchored January 26 as the Australia Day. Councils will be stripped of the ability to issue citizenships unless they comply. Now, this is I don't know why we're wasting our time doing this. We can't just have an Australian Day at a certain date different to Australia. It's ridiculous. It's got to be the same day. I agree it's probably the wrong date, but it's up to federal politicians and governments to change the date. It's not up to us. I think there's too much to lose for us to change the dates, so it's got to be done by federally. Now, two councils have already been stripped of their citizenship rights in Victoria by trying to change the dates. We've got too much to lose. It's got to be done federally. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor, if you'd have the chair, I'll put it back on. Well, thank you, Councillor Walker, for your motion, and I think it's great to have this discussion in our community. There's no doubt about that. I'm all for that. I'm on record, and I think some in this room would have heard me say previously that I don't believe the 26th of January is the most suitable date at all for Australia Day. I've said that publicly, even on TV. I think I've said that before. So it's no surprise that that is my thoughts. However, I will say that people out there think I would vote against this motion. I'm sure of that. If I go on Councillor Dawkins' recommendation, you've got to go for those who support you. But then I'm torn, as I had a discussion with Councillor Walker this morning about what my personal views are, very strongly that we need reconciliation with the Aboriginal people. I agree with Councillor Gibbs, Deputy Mayor, for his view that he's just spoken. I think we have been working hard to try and do that, and I am too, like him, sad and disappointed at some of the views that maybe we're not doing that. If we're not doing it well enough, then we do need to do it better, and I don't dispute that, and I would be more than happy to be open, and I've been open and with people with reconciliation discussions that we've had just recently with some of the people. So more than happy to do that, and as a council we are more than happy to do that, I am sure. I am torn because I really want to support this 100%. I really want to make a statement to say I agree, and the thing that on rereading and reading it to say is that at least the motion does say we're legally bound to do so by the federal government. So anything they require us to do, we will do. That's what the motion says. It's clear to me that is in there. It also says very clearly consult with Aboriginal people, which I'm more than happy to do. It also says to remove reference to January 26 as Australia Day. I'm not sure that we can do that as a council until it is done by the federal government. That is really the issue that I struggle with. The other parts of it, 1 and 3, I am more than happy to support. Therefore, I'm trying to weigh out what's the most important for where my vote should go, and that's something that I'm torn a little bit, I am. What I would love to see, if we could wind the clock back, we went back to the 1980s, the 1970s, when we had the last weekend in January, we had a celebration. It wasn't set on a date, but we had this celebration of what Australia was all about, and we didn't hear about this fors and against. Why that was ever changed, it wasn't me, but it was done, which has caused a lot of this friction. And what disappoints me so much now is that we do have a federal government, and even the opposition don't seem to be supportive of changing it at the moment, but we do have a government that is probably more divisive than trying to reconcile at the moment by making it harder and harder and more difficult. And that really hurts me, and it's disappointing for me as a person to see that is happening federally. It's something that, you know, I don't want to see, and any chance that I get, I do talk to politicians, federal and local. Not that they have a big influence here, the ones we've got in this state, but it's certainly not good enough what is happening now, federally, in my view. So, look, a little bit torn, more in favour to support the motion at the moment. I'll wait to see if there's any other discussion from and hear the closing. But really want to say that I am sorry if we have not worked hard enough with you. I believe we've done our best. If it's not good enough, then I apologise, and I am sorry for that. Whatever we can do, please, the door is open. Come and talk to us. We're more than happy to do that, no matter which way this motion goes. Always happy to do that. And also to say that I think I am so sorry for the way that the Aboriginal people were treated when white Australia first started, or when they first came out here. And that is something that has been said, not in this council, but by the federal government. And I think really we should have a discussion in our community very clearly by the people to how we go forward. And that's the part that I would like to move 1 and probably 3 and right, but I'm not convinced that we can remove reference to January the 26th as Australia Day. As a council, I'm not sure that we can do that, and I would like more advice on that into the future as well. So that's probably where I sit. A bit divided. Thank you. Thank you. No other speakers? Councillor Walker, you wish to close?
I do, Mayor, thank you. I'll go back through some of the points that have been raised. Councillor Soward mentioned that we do have division already in society, and that he worries that councils pointing this out is causing more division. I'm not sure if that is a fair characterisation of what you said, but that seems to be what I heard, that there's growing division in our community. I think that's obvious to everyone. This issue is certainly not going to go away. I do believe sincerely that the date will change. It might be soon, it might be in the next year, it might be in the next 10 years. And I, implore Launceston Council to be a part of that process. Councillor Spencer mentioned losing citizenship ceremonies. I think I wrote this motion specifically so that wouldn't happen. And so that's not a consideration in this motion. As the Mayor pointed out, any legal obligations that we have, this motion would meet. And so I suppose that would even include, Councillor Mackenzie mentioned something like the city deal or any other possible implications. In terms of our legal obligations, this motion doesn't threaten those. I note that quite a few councillors talked about which date we should change to, and of course that is up to the federal government. It's a nationally gazetted holiday. It's up to the federal government to step up and actually begin that conversation. It's up to the federal government to recognise that there is a rift in this country, that at the moment they're ignoring that. Now, it might be possible that you could argue that the people asking for a change are causing that rift, but it's equally possible to say the people who are resisting that change are causing that rift. And wanting to create inclusion, I don't think can ever be something that's accused of wanting to cause a rift. Wanting to stick to the status quo and maintain the celebration of a colonial event, of which there are many. I mean, August the 22nd, 1770, Captain Cook put a flag in northern Queensland and claimed the east coast of Australia for the Crown, I don't hear anyone mentioning that as a proud moment in our history. Other dates. There was, Empire Day used to be celebrated in this country. Most people don't even know when Empire Day is. I do believe that Australia Day will become, essentially an anachronism. And we'll always remember January 26th, but for different reasons. So when it comes to what date we should change to, of course it's up to the federal government, but this motion will encourage the federal government to make a change. It's not up for us to suggest that date. We don't have to do that. We just need to start the process.
Your time is up.
Can I ask for an extension?
Can't for closing, but
Okay.
I'll give you 20 seconds or so.
Thank you very much. The ramifications of not changing are greater than the ramifications of changing. So, I implore the council, and I thank everyone who's spoken, and I implore the council to support this motion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? So that's two. So that's 5 against, 5 for, 2 abstaining. Have I got that? So they're against. So that's lost. So, did you want to do the alternate motion? We can do that, can't we? Or, have you moved that? Moved by. Lost you, Councillor Mackenzie. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Finlay. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor?
No, I just want to make sure we keep the conversation going.
Thank you. Or Councillor Finlay. Any councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Soward.
Yeah, look, just want to add again, I commend Alderman Mackenzie what he's trying to do, Councillor Mackenzie for what he's trying to do here. But I guess I'll just echo what I said before. To me, having federal leadership, and I'm like others that have mentioned in the previous motion, some leadership from one of the parties, and preferably all of the parties that all line up and go, yeah, it's the wrong date. It's the wrong date, let's do something about it. So I can see what Councillor Mackenzie's trying to do, but again, to me, it has to be federally, so I'm not going to support.
Any other councillors wish to speak?
Thank Councillor Mackenzie for putting the motion forward, and I do appreciate what he's trying to do. This will keep the conversation going. It's fairly non-specific in terms of an outcome, and I would ask if any other councillor would consider amending that motion. Is that possible? If they choose to, I won't, because I'll put my motion to the floor. It's had its turn. I will be supporting any efforts to reconcile and to be a more inclusive community. So I will be supporting the motion as it stands.
Thank you. Any other speakers on the alternate motion? Councillor Mackenzie, you wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's 2 against. I think I got that right. Correct. The rest are all for. That is carried. Thank you. We'll now have a break. So for 15 minutes.
Starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local.
Very organised. I just want to mention a few, and obviously Christmas has been in between, come and gone, but it was fantastic to be involved with the Launceston City Community Christmas, and General Manager, yourself and to the councillors, a thank you from that group, the committee, for the support that we give them. Very appreciative of that. And it was great, over 500 people there and a fantastic luncheon as well. I ran up the stairs. I might leave it there since I... Yeah, sorry about that. But I won't talk about Mona at all. I'll leave that to the acting Mayor at the time. So I'll leave it over to you, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Obviously, a couple of things happened while you were away. The first thing in date order I'd like to do is just reference on Thursday, the 17th of January, the outstanding Capital Works bus tour that was made available to all councillors. It really was outstanding, and we thank the General Manager and the directors, particularly Director Eberhardt, for his work on the day, but all directors, because it was an insightful and very educative opportunity for returning councillors and new councillors to be exposed to the Capital Works projects right across the breadth of the council. So thank you very much for that. On Friday the 18th of January, in the midst of the Monofoma Festival, it was a great pleasure to be able to welcome interstate visitors at the Launceston Airport who had either won free passage to the event or were visiting media with Brian. And it was a fantastic, I think, example of the impact that the festival had on Launceston and northern Tasmania, with close to 10,000 attending the events, with an interstate visitor number equal to that of the last festival in Hobart, with good numbers of accommodation figures being reported through Tourism Northern Tasmania. The festival certainly ticked all of its goals, and from my perspective, what the festival also did was connect with our community so well. A lot of work had been done in the months leading up to the festival to show a real depth of engagement, and we saw that with the mini MOFO sessions happening at Design Tasmania. We saw that with the public meetings facilitated at the QV Mag. We saw that, though, with the depth of relationships that were developed with local artists, with local arts organisations, and with our own council. And I think that's the success of the festival. It wasn't just a festival that came and that happened here for a week. It was a festival that really developed its relationship and continues to develop its relationship with the Launceston community. And that's why locals and interstate and intrastate visitors have taken to it so well. So I really want to thank David Walsh and Brian Ritchie and the MOFO team. I want to thank the state government for their investment in the event, and thank Launceston locals for supporting the event. And we look forward to the next 2 years with excitement to see how it continues to grow. Importantly, want to really regard Tracy and Director Tracy and her team at the QV Mag, who worked so hard to ensure that the hub of the festival at the QV Mag precinct was executed so brilliantly and reflected so well on our organisation. So thanks for that. Mr Mayor, also on Saturday the 19th of January, as part of MOFO, Director Hurst and I had the pleasure, together with Tracy, of attending a brunch at Design Tasmania. And the reason I want to mention that is it was an opening of the kitchen and the barbecue facilities, which this council through the General Manager facilitated, but also to recognise the outstanding dedication and leadership of outgoing Chair Dr Pippa Dixon. For 5.5 years she has provided outstanding leadership at Design Tasmania, which has not only educated visitors and locals alike about that destination and the place of design in Tasmania, but I think it would be fair to say also educated council about one of the jewels in our cultural crown and how we can bring that into the fold and regard it more highly. So it was a pleasure to recognise her and to celebrate with her as well on that Saturday morning.
Thank you. Any other councillor reports? No? We'll move on then. Questions from councillors? Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a couple of little questions. What is the cost to the council for Fabian Datner when she does the leadership meetings for the councillors?
Take on notice. General Manager.
Look, I'll take it on notice, councillor, but you have been provided with the quote some time ago. That may have been before you were in the chair, though, so I'll get that recirculated.
And the sponsorship deal with Aurora Stadium, when it changed the name from Aurora to UTAS, what price are we getting for that?
Look, I'm still chasing down the documentation associated with that, and so once I've got that, obviously I will deal with that. That will be dealt with in confidence with the council.
Thank you.
Councillor Daking.
Thank you. I believe this question is to the General Manager and potentially the Director of Planning. In respect to the recent events of the mobile food vendors within Launceston, I ask that all councillors are allowed to be included in all policy decisions moving forward. Could that be possible?
General Manager.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Now, clearly it's possible. The council make all policy decisions of the councils. What we're talking about in respect of being able to inform a policy decision of the council is to conduct a trial of food vans to provide evidence for the council to be able to consider in the various different elements that it has to in making that decision in respect of the policy. So the answer to the question is yes.
Follow-up question. Thank you, General Manager. There seems to be some... Just wait for Janie. You all right? Good to go. There seems to be some confusion about the mobile food vendors operating in High Street and their permits, criteria and conditions versus potentially the mobile food vans, and I know they're a trial, that are potentially about to happen in the CBD in the mall. Would you be able to, and you might not be able to do this now, but provide myself and the councillors with those different permits that may be there and potentially why that will be?
Take it on notice, thank you. Any other question, Councillor Mackenzie?
I just noted with interest, I think a week or so ago, the previous chairman of the Launceston Flood Authority, is still retired from that long. So,
well, no, he's still in for a little while. We just extended it.
He made I wrote a letter to the editor in regards to flows through the Tanema catchment, requesting a significant increase in flows through the Trevelyan Dam area. And this question, I think we had some conversations a number of months, might even a year or so ago, about increasing the flows, I think up to 2 or 3 cubic, just to confirm that's
2.5.
And B, whether we've got ongoing conversations with Hydro in relation to releasing further flows through that catchment.
Yeah. Director Everhard.
So we're currently doing some work with NRM North and Hydro Tas regarding the understanding the impacts of different flows will make on the estuary, because it's not just the impact on the sediment. On myself, we release a lot of water. The use of the first basin will become impacted as well, and we don't understand the impact of the additional flows on sediment yet, and the benefit that may cause. So that work's occurring at the moment. It'll probably continue for another 6 months before we have the evidence.
Any other questions without notice? Councillor Daking.
Would I be able to just clarify my question that I posed before?
Well, you can do, but you're going to get it in writing.
With regards to food vans, there seems to be 2 different rules. The high street food vans, a condition is they cannot use the CBD under their permit, and they have to be within 200 metres of a food business to get their consent. We now call in food vans to utilise the CBD. So one would think the food vans on High Street can't use the food vans or can't become a food van vendor in the CBD.
That's correct. Well, they could become part of the trial if they want to, but they can't be there without... The trial is the only time they could be there, correct, under our current policy.
Okay, but under their existing food vendor permit, it states they can't be in the CBD.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So there's, 2 different
We'll put that in writing too, Sarah. Councillor Spencer.
I'm just a bit concerned that these people that get this food van probably won't be paying us enough money. I think it's worth $100 a day. If they can't make that, it's not going to work. But to just let them go there for $200 a week is going to be too hard on everyone else. Thank you.
General Manager.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. And I won't go into details, but we charge significantly more for the licence in Civic Square, and there'll be obviously commensurate rates that we'll need to work out that are applicable for the mall, and that's work we're doing now, but I can rest assured it's not going to be a couple $100.
Any other questions from councillors? No, we'll move on then. 12.1, I think we're up to. Launceston Advisory Committee. Someone happy to move that? Councillor Spencer, seconded. Councillor Daking. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Spencer? Daking? Any councillor wish to speak to it? Can I put the motion? Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. No workshops, I don't think it is it? So we go to 15.1, 21 Belgrave Parade, Youngtown petition to amend sealed plan. Happy to move? Somebody happy to move a motion? That we do it? Moved Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Harris. Any discussion you wish to speak to it? Well, we need a point 4. That's going to be the next vote. Who are the 4 putting their hand up? Councillor Spencer. That's 1. Councillor Harris. We don't have to, but it's... Any other councillors? Sorry? Yeah, it's a one-off. We've got Councillor Harris and Councillor, I think we have, and Councillor Spencer. Any other councillors? Mackenzie? Thank you. Anyone else? Now's your chance. Will 3 do? Has to be 4. Councillor Finlay, thank you. Is that right? You withdraw. Who's the other one? Sorry? Oh. No. I'm not female. You said you wanted a female. But anyway, it's not necessary. We've got the 3 then. At the moment, we need 1 more. Councillor Finlay, thank you. So that's the 4, okay? Any further discussion? Can I put the motion that those 4 be elected to the... Yep, all those in favour? That's... I think it's carried, thank you. If you vote against it, you're on. We move to Event Sponsorship Policy Review, 15.2. Moved, Alderman Mackenzie. Oh, Councillor Mackenzie. It's a bad habit to get out of. Councillor Dawkins. You wish to just speak to it?
I think only things need. We've had a good workshop where we've gone through all the amendments that have been mooted there, and I think we dealt with any of the issues that we had at that point in time. I certainly don't have any further, so I'm happy to move the motion.
Councillor Dawkins. Any other councillors wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is carried. Thank you. 15.2, delegation from Council to General Manager. Councillor Cox is moving. Is there a seconder? Councillor Soward. Do you wish to speak to it? Councillor Cox.
Only really just to say perhaps the Chair could just give us an example. I know it's only a procedural thing, but I don't quite understand what it is. If there is something I don't quite understand. I know it's only a procedural process.
General Manager.
General Manager. Director.
Handballing here.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I think that Louise is probably best.
Oh. Thank you.
It is a purely administrative task. So what occurs is that once the planning process has been complied with and the officers from each directorate involved in the planning process have confirmed in writing that the plans that we have tabled before us are compliant in accordance with the permit conditions, then we affix the seal of council in accordance with the decision made by council. So it's a purely administrative thing. But if the general manager can't delegate it, then it can't happen when he's not here.
Thank you. Any further questions, discussion? Can I put the motion? Those in favour? And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 18.1, Launceston Flood Authority. Someone happy to move that? The annual report. Thank you, Councillor Finlay. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to it? Councillor Finlay, Councillor Mackenzie. Any councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Street Committee. Here we go. Street Tree Advisory Group. Moved by Councillor Cox, seconded by Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Cox?
Just quickly to say, I think it's a good decision. It served its purpose. It has served a very good purpose. And under the direction of I've got no doubt that the work will continue.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to it? Question?
Just a question. I think there are some members of the Tree Committee that were going to be consulted in regards to it. So I assume that went well, and there was no sort of residual issues associated with the move to pull that apart.
Of course, they were disappointed, but they understood the decision of council and why.
Anyone else wish to speak? Can I put the motion? Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 18.3, action in respect to the Heritage Forest Advisory Committee. Councillor Soward moving. Councillor Mackenzie seconding. Any Councillor Soward wish to comment?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I know Councillor Mackenzie and I have raised this before, but it's all fairly self-explanatory in the report. The committee, I guess, has, fitted its purpose. It's done what it's set out to do, and there were some discussions around taking this course of action. It's obviously very much in the operational domain now, and I know Councillor Mackenzie is very passionate about perhaps in the future, as some work goes on out there, perhaps a different iteration of this along the river, the work along the river. But again, as it spells out very clearly in the report on 119 and 120, it's successfully rehabilitated a landfill site. There's some terrific work going on off the planning document out there now. And on behalf of the committee and Councillor Mackenzie and I, who were the last representatives on that, we'd like to acknowledge obviously those who have worked on that before, particularly Councillor Waddle, who spent a number of years on that committee. So all very self-explanatory, and as we all know, it's a very exciting part of the city with some great things happening out there. Very popular. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think it's great maturity of a committee that's done what it's done, realised that its purpose has now moved on to an operational focus and decided to phase itself out. So I think that's a good, mature way of looking at things. And just to add to the comments made by Councillor Soward in regards to future generation of what might look forward, I guess we've got development of St Leonard's, we've got the ribbon of blue and a number of things out there, and the access along those ways, which I think there are a number of people in the community and some of the members of that committee expressed interest in perhaps forming a future committee to actually see that through, to make sure that ribbon of blue and that level of detail that's required to develop the waterways along to St Leonard's might be something that a future committee might look at.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak? Ask questions? Councillor Soward, do you wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. 18.4, proposed street names. Moved Councillor Soward. Seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Soward?
I think they're absolutely sensational, Mr Mayor. Absolutely sensational. As it says on page 123, I'm a bit of a Tenzing Drive fan myself. No, in all seriousness, I mean, as it says on 123, Mr Mayor, continuing the theme of street names associated with that expedition led by Sir Edmund Hillary, obviously in the vicinity of Hillary Street, Tenzing Drive, Sherpa Court and Himalaya Court, absolutely fantastic, and I look forward to further development out there and further names coming to.
Thank you. Councillor Harris? Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. I think that's all the items we have on the agenda, so we'll close the meeting.
Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.